Everyone ignored the CEO's deaf mom at the airport until a single dad spoke to her through sign. The airport was drowning in chaos that Tuesday afternoon, but Evan Carter saw what no one else did. An elderly woman signing desperately for help while hundreds of people walked past like she didn't exist. He had 3 minutes to catch his flight home to his deaf daughter. 3 minutes before he'd break the one promise that mattered most. But when their eyes met across that crowded terminal, Evan made a choice that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his future. This is a story about the moment compassion collides with destiny, about the invisible people we pass every day, and how one act of kindness can redesign an entire life. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of Logan International Airport flickered overhead as Evan Carter ran his fingers through his already disheveled hair, glancing at his watch for the fourth time in as many minutes. 4:47 p.m. His flight to Hartford was boarding at gate B22, and he was standing at gate A14, separated by what might as well have been the Grand Canyon during Tuesday afternoon rush hour traffic. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, hiking his worn leather messenger bag higher on his shoulder. The strap had been digging into the same spot for the past hour, leaving what he knew would be an angry red mark. But that was the least of his problems. Evan had promised Lila he'd be home by 7. He'd promised her mac and cheese night, the one tradition they'd maintained religiously every Tuesday since her mother, Sarah, had walked out 3 years ago. The one constant in his 8-year-old daughter's world that had been turned upside down more times than any child should have to endure. And now, thanks to a client meeting that had run 2 hours over and Boston traffic that had tested every ounce of his patience, he was going to be late. Again. The guilt sat heavy in his chest as he navigated through the sea of travelers, dodging rolling suitcases and oblivious tourists who'd stopped dead in the middle of the walkway to consult their phones. He'd already texted Mrs. Chen, their neighbor who watched Lila after school. She'd responded with a simple thumbs up, but Evan could read between the lines. Mrs. Chen was 67 years old and had her own life. He was asking too much, too often. Architectural dreams don't pay the bills, his father had told him 15 years ago when Evan had announced he was leaving the family's insurance business to pursue design. "You'll regret this, son." His father had been wrong about the regret. Evan never regretted following his passion, but he'd been right about the bills. Evan's small firm, Carter and Associates, associates being a generous term for the occasional freelancer he could afford, was barely treading water. The project that had kept him in Boston today was a small residential renovation, the kind of work he'd once imagined he'd be too successful to take on. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and single dads with deaf daughters certainly couldn't afford to turn down steady income. Evan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out while still moving, a skill he'd perfected over years of perpetual motion. Lila. "Dad, where are you?" She'd typed the words instead of sending a video message in sign language, which meant she was using Mrs. Chen's phone. His daughter's own phone, a necessity, not a luxury when your child couldn't hear, was programmed with video messaging apps that made communication easier. Evan. "At airport. Getting on plane now. Home by 7. I promise, sweetheart." 3 dots appeared, pulsed, then disappeared. Appeared again. He could picture her, sitting at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table, probably already with her homework spread out, her dark hair pulled into the messy bun she insisted on doing herself every morning. Her brown eyes, Sarah's eyes, though Evan tried not to think about that, would be worried. Lila. "Okay. Love you." Evan. "Love you more than all the buildings in the world." It was their thing. He'd started it when she was 4, right after the diagnosis confirmed what they'd suspected: profound sensorineural hearing loss in both ears. Irreversible. The audiologist had used a lot of big words that day, but they'd all meant the same thing. His daughter would never hear his voice tell her he loved her. So he'd learned to say it differently. In signs, in texts, in gestures, in presence, and showing up, always showing up, even when it meant running through airports and making impossible promises about mac and cheese. Evan rounded the corner toward Terminal B, his pace quickening. The moving walkway was broken. Of course it was. So he broke into a jog, his bag bouncing against his hip. Other travelers gave him annoyed looks as he wove between them, but he didn't care. He'd catch this flight if it killed him. And then he saw her. She was sitting alone at gate C-17, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a navy blue cardigan despite the terminal's aggressive heating. She was elderly, probably mid-70s, Evan guessed, with soft, weathered features that reminded him of his grandmother. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped him dead in his tracks. It was her hands. They were moving rapidly, signing with increasing urgency, trying to get the attention of the gate agent who stood less than 10 feet away, completely absorbed in his computer screen. The woman's face held that particular expression Evan had come to recognize over the past 8 years. Frustration mixed with resignation, panic underlaid with the bone-deep weariness of being unseen. The gate agent glanced up once, made brief eye contact with the woman, then immediately looked away, his expression closing off like a door slamming shut. He said something to his colleague, who shrugged. Neither of them moved to help. Evan felt his stomach clench. Around the woman, dozens of people passed by. A businessman in a sharp suit nearly collided with her as she stood, still signing, trying to get someone, anyone, to acknowledge her presence. He sidestepped smoothly without breaking his phone conversation, not even sparing her a glance. A family walked past, parents with 3 kids in tow, the mother's hand firmly gripping the smallest child's wrist. One of the older children looked at the elderly woman curiously, started to slow down. But the father urged them along with a sharp, "Come on, we're late." Late. Evan was late. His flight was boarding in, he checked his watch again, less than 6 minutes. By the time he got to gate B-22, they'd be on final boarding call. If he missed this flight, there wasn't another one until 9 p.m. He'd be lucky to get home by 11. Lila would be asleep. Mac and cheese night would be broken, another promise shattered like all the others. He should keep walking. He had to keep walking. His daughter needed him. But Evan's feet had stopped moving entirely. The elderly woman's hands were still moving, faster now, more desperate. She was signing help over and over, the sign unmistakable to anyone who understood ASL, American Sign Language. Her eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for someone, anyone who could see her. And then her gaze landed on Evan. Their eyes met across 15 feet of terminal space, and Evan watched as something in her expression shifted. It was the same look Lila got sometimes when she tried to tell someone in a store or at the park that she was deaf, and they responded by speaking slower and louder, as if volume could bridge the gap. It was the look of someone who had learned not to expect help, who had been disappointed so many times that hope itself had become a dangerous indulgence. But there was still a question in her eyes, a small, flickering ember of possibility. "Please," she signed simply, her hands slowing down, the gesture almost a prayer. "Please see me." Evan's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know it was probably Mrs. Chen, maybe with a question about Lila's dinner or homework. Or maybe it was Lila herself, wondering where he was, whether he'd keep his promise this time. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to keep moving. He'd worked with hundreds of people who couldn't understand sign language. It wasn't their fault. They hadn't learned. They didn't know. How could you blame people for not seeing something they'd never been taught to look for? But God, he was tired of excuses. He was tired of watching his daughter navigate a world that so often treated her disability as an inconvenience rather than just another way of being human. He was tired of the weight of being the only person who always showed up for her. And maybe that was exactly why he couldn't walk past this woman. Evan's feet moved before his brain had finished processing the decision. He adjusted his messenger bag, took a breath, and walked directly toward gate C-17. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she realized he was approaching her, not just passing by. She straightened in her chair, her hands stilling in her lap, and Evan could see the careful neutrality she'd arranged over her features, the protective mask of someone who'd been disappointed before. He stopped a respectful distance away and slowly, clearly signed, "Hello? How can I help you?" The transformation that crossed her face was like watching sunrise after a long night. Her whole body seemed to expand, to breathe again, relief flooding her features so intensely that Evan felt his throat tighten. She stood quickly, her hands already moving. "My flight," she signed, the motions urgent but controlled. They changed the gate. The agent told me, but I didn't. She stopped, frustration flashing across her face. I didn't understand. I asked him to write it down, but he just kept talking. I've been sitting here for 30 minutes, and I don't know where I'm supposed to be. Evan glanced at the departure board above gate C-17. The display showed a Southwest flight to Phoenix, boarding in 20 minutes. Where are you going? He signed. Hartford, she signed back. Flight 1947 to Hartford. I need to get home. My daughter. She stopped again, and Evan saw actual fear in her eyes now. She's expecting me. She'll be worried. Hartford, the same flight he needed to catch. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Evan checked his watch, 4:51 p.m. He pulled out his phone, quickly bringing up the airline app he'd learned to keep readily accessible during years of last-minute travel. He pulled up the flight information and showed her the screen. Your flight is at gate B-22. He signed with one hand while holding the phone with the other. Terminal B, it's boarding now. We need to go. We? She signed, confusion crossing her features. I'm on the same flight, Evan explained. Come with me. I'll make sure you get there. For just a moment, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back quickly, nodding, and reached for the small rolling suitcase beside her chair. Evan noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she grabbed the handle. Thank you, she signed, the gesture small and profound. No one else stopped. I know, Evan signed back simply. Let's go. They moved quickly through the terminal, Evan leading the way and regularly glancing back to make sure she was keeping pace. For an elderly woman, she moved with surprising speed, determination replacing the defeat that had marked her posture earlier. As they walked, Evan's mind raced. He was helping her, yes, but he was also probably going to miss the flight entirely. Even running, even with the woman clearly trying her best to keep up, they were cutting it impossibly close. Gate B-22 was at the far end of Terminal B, and they were starting from Terminal C. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. They reached the security checkpoint between terminals, the bottleneck that always slowed everything down. A TSA agent stood at the podium, checking boarding passes and IDs with the enthusiasm of someone who'd done this exact motion 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Evan pulled out both their boarding passes on his phone and his driver's license. The woman fumbled with her purse, her hand still shaking slightly, and Evan realized she was more shaken by the experience than she'd let on. It's okay, he signed quickly. Take your time. She found her ID, a Connecticut driver's license that read Margaret Wells, DOB, 03-15-1948, and held it out with a boarding pass printed on actual paper, something Evan hadn't seen in years. The TSA agent barely glanced at either of them, waving them through with mechanical efficiency. They entered Terminal B, and Evan could see Gate B-22 in the distance, still about a quarter-mile away. The departure board showed their flight status, final boarding. We have to run, Evan signed quickly. Can you? Margaret Wells, he knew her name now, squared her shoulders and nodded firmly. Without another word, they both broke into a run. Evan was dimly aware of the picture they must have made. A rumpled architect in his 30s with a battered messenger bag and an elderly woman pulling a suitcase, both sprinting through an airport terminal like their lives depended on it. Other travelers moved aside, some calling out questions they couldn't answer, others just staring. Evan's lungs burned. His messenger bag bounced painfully against his back. Beside him, Margaret was breathing hard but keeping pace, her small suitcase rattling over the terminal's tile floor. Gate B-20, Gate B-21, and then, finally, Gate B-22. The gate agent was literally reaching for the door to close it when they skidded to a stop at the podium. She looked up, startled, taking in their flushed faces and heavy breathing. Flight 1947 to Hartford? Evan gasped out, holding up his phone with the boarding pass displayed. The gate agent, her name tag read Jennifer, looked like she was about to say they were too late. Evan watched the calculation happen in her eyes. Follow protocol and close the door, or show mercy to two people who'd clearly run themselves ragged to make this flight. Boarding passes, Jennifer said finally, her tone neutral. Evan held his phone out. Margaret presented her paper boarding pass with trembling hands. Jennifer scanned both, and Evan heard the blessed beep of approval. "You're in the last boarding group," Jennifer said, her expression softening slightly. "But you made it. Go ahead." They walked down the jet bridge in silence, both still catching their breath. It wasn't until they were actually on the plane navigating the narrow aisle toward their seats that Evan realized they weren't sitting together. His seat was 14C. Margaret's boarding pass showed 23A. When they reached row 14, Evan stopped and turned to Margaret. "You're in row 23, he signed. "Will you be okay?" Margaret looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out and squeezed his arm, a gesture that transcended language. "Thank you," she signed slowly, deliberately. "You gave me back my voice today." Evan felt something crack open in his chest. "You were never voiceless," he signed back. "Other people just weren't listening." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she let them fall. She squeezed his arm once more, then continued down the aisle toward her seat. Evan collapsed into 14C, his messenger bag shoved under the seat in front of him, and finally pulled out his phone. 3 missed texts from Mrs. Chen, 2 from a client, and 1 more from Lila. Lila: "Mrs. Chen is making me vegetables. Please come home soon." Despite everything, the run, the stress, the near miss with the flight, Evan smiled. He typed quickly. Evan: "On the plane right now. We'll be home by 7. Mac and cheese, I promise. Extra cheese." Lila: "Extra, extra cheese?" Evan: "Extra, extra, extra cheese." Lila: "Okay. Hurry." The plane pushed back from the gate as Evan buckled his seatbelt, his heart rate finally starting to return to normal. Around him, other passengers settled in for the 50-minute flight, pulling out books and tablets and neck pillows. The woman next to him in 14B was already asleep, her head tilted at an angle that looked deeply uncomfortable. Evan leaned back and closed his eyes, but his mind wouldn't settle. He kept seeing Margaret's face when he'd first approached her, that combination of relief and disbelief. He kept seeing her hands moving frantically, desperately, while people walked past like she was invisible. He thought about all the times Lila had come home from school with that same expression, not upset, not crying, just quietly resigned to being misunderstood. The time in 2nd grade when she'd tried to tell her teacher she needed to use the bathroom, and the teacher had smiled and nodded without understanding, leaving Lila to suffer through an entire math lesson. The time at the grocery store when she'd tried to ask the clerk where the cereal was, and the clerk had called for a manager, speaking about Lila like she wasn't standing right there. "She can't hear you, but she can see you," Evan had said to that clerk, keeping his voice level despite the anger churning in his gut. "She's deaf, not invisible." The clerk had apologized, flustered and embarrassed, but Evan knew the damage was already done. Another moment where Lila had learned that the world wouldn't always accommodate her, wouldn't always see her as fully human, fully present. It was exhausting being the buffer between his daughter and a world that saw her disability before it saw her. It was exhausting teaching her to be brave and confident and proud of who she was when half the people she encountered treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. And yet, he thought, glancing back toward where Margaret was sitting in row 23, those small moments of connection mattered. They mattered so much. The look on Margaret's face when he'd signed hello, that had mattered. The relief of being seen, being acknowledged, being treated like a person instead of an obstacle, that changed something fundamental. The flight attendant began the safety demonstration at the front of the plane. Evan had seen it hundreds of times and tuned it out automatically, his mind drifting back to the deadlines waiting for him at home. The residential renovation project needed final drawings by Friday. He had a proposal due for a small commercial space next week, bills to pay, a daughter to raise, a business to keep afloat. His phone buzzed one more time before he had to switch it to airplane mode. Not Lila this time, but a notification from his bank. Account balance alert, $1,247.53. Rent was due in a week, $1,800. Evan closed his eyes and let out a long breath. The math was simple and devastating. He needed to land another project, fast, or they'd be dipping into the emergency fund again. And the emergency fund wasn't bottomless. "Architectural dreams don't pay the bills," his father's voice echoed in his memory. But some things were worth more than bills, Evan thought fiercely. Some things were worth the struggle. Being there for Lila. Designing buildings that meant something, that served communities, that made the world slightly better. Stopping to help an elderly woman who'd been treated like she didn't exist. The plane lifted off, and Evan watched Boston fall away beneath them, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. Somewhere down there, other people were having other problems, living other lives. Other deaf people were probably being ignored, overlooked, treated as less than. And other people were probably stopping to help, he reminded himself. Other people were learning sign language, creating accessibility, pushing for change. He wasn't alone in this fight, even when it felt like it. The flight was smooth, the November sky clear. Evan pulled out his laptop and tried to work on the renovation drawings, but his mind kept wandering. He thought about Margaret, about whether she was okay sitting back there, whether she needed anything. He thought about Lila, about whether she was doing her homework or arguing with Mrs. Chen about screen time. He thought about Sarah, always Sarah, lurking in the corners of his mind, and wondered if she ever thought about them, about the daughter she'd abandoned because she couldn't handle raising a special needs child. "She's not special needs," Evan had shouted during one of their final fights. "She's just deaf. She's perfect exactly as she is." "That's easy for you to say," Sarah had shot back. "You're not the one who has to explain to everyone why she doesn't respond when they talk to her. You're not the one people stare at in restaurants." The divorce had been quick and cold. Sarah had given up all parental rights without a fight. Evan had been relieved and heartbroken in equal measure. Relieved that Lila wouldn't grow up with a mother who saw her as a burden. Heartbroken that his daughter would always carry the wound of that abandonment. But they'd survived. They'd built a life. It wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, but it was theirs. The plane began its descent into Hartford, the Connecticut River snaking silver beneath them in the dusk. Evan packed up his laptop, having accomplished exactly nothing on the renovation drawings. He'd work late tonight after Lila was asleep, like he always did. The math of single parenthood was brutal. Every hour spent with his daughter was an hour not spent earning money, but every hour spent working was an hour stolen from the person who mattered most. He checked his watch, 6:52 p.m. If baggage claim was quick, if traffic cooperated, if the universe decided to throw him one small mercy, he'd make it home by 7:15, close enough to call it a kept promise. The plane touched down smoothly, taxied to the gate, and Evan waited impatiently while the rows ahead of him deplaned. When he finally stood and grabbed his messenger bag, he glanced back toward row 23. Margaret was standing in the aisle, waiting her turn, her small suitcase already in hand. Their eyes met, and she smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. She signed, "Thank you again," and Evan signed back, "You're welcome." And then the crowd shifted, and she was lost to view, and Evan was shuffling forward with everyone else, another anonymous traveler in another anonymous airport, all of them desperate to get wherever they were going. He made it through baggage claim in record time, the benefit of only carrying a messenger bag, and was in his car in the parking garage by 7:02. The drive to their apartment in West Hartford took 12 minutes. He pulled into the parking space in front of Mrs. Chen's unit at 7:14 p.m. Made it. Barely, but he'd made it. Evan knocked on Mrs. Chen's door, heard shuffling inside, and then there she was. Lila, his beautiful daughter, her dark hair escaping from its bun in wild curls, her face breaking into a grin when she saw him. "Dad!" she signed enthusiastically, launching herself into his arms. Evan caught her and held on tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hi, sweetheart. Were you good for Mrs. Chen?" "She made me eat broccoli," Lila signed dramatically when he set her down. "It was horrible." "Vegetables are horrible," Evan agreed with mock seriousness. "That's why we're having mac and cheese." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling. "She was perfect," she said, and Evan read her lips while Lila simultaneously signed the translation. They'd developed this system over the years. Mrs. Chen didn't sign fluently, but she tried, and Lila had become an expert at reading lips and translating. "Her homework's all done." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Evan said sincerely. "I really appreciate—" She waved him off. "You know I love having her, but go. You have a promise to keep." Evan gathered Lila's backpack, helped her into her coat, and they walked the short distance to their own apartment on the first floor. As Evan unlocked the door, Lila tugged on his sleeve. "Dad," she signed, "you look tired." "Long day," he signed back. "But I'm here now." "You're always here," Lila signed, and the simple trust in her expression nearly broke him. They made mac and cheese together, Lila standing on her step stool at the counter, carefully measuring the milk and butter while Evan drained the pasta. They'd perfected this routine over years of Tuesday nights, a ritual that meant more than just food. It meant reliability. It meant someone who kept their promises. While the cheese sauce bubbled on the stove, Lila signed, "Tell me about your day." This was another ritual. They always shared the best and worst parts of their day over dinner. Evan stirred the pasta into the sauce, considering his answer. "I helped someone at the airport today," he finally signed. "An elderly woman who's deaf. She needed help finding her gate, and no one would stop for her." Lila's eyes widened. "Like me?" she signed. Evan's heart clenched. "Yes, sweetheart, like you." "What did you do?" "I helped her find her gate. We ran through the airport together and caught the plane." Lila was quiet for a moment, thoughtfully chewing her mac and cheese. Then she signed, "Did it make you almost miss the plane?" "Almost," Evan admitted. "But you helped her anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" It was the simplest question and the most complicated answer. Evan set down his fork and signed carefully, making sure she understood every word. "Because everybody deserves to be seen, Lila. Everybody deserves to have someone stop and listen, even when they're speaking with their hands instead of their voice. And because," he paused, making sure he had her full attention, "because I hope when you're out in the world and you need help, someone will stop for you too." Lila considered this seriously. "Did she say thank you?" "She did." "Good," Lila signed decisively. "People should say thank you." They finished dinner, and Evan helped Lila with her bedtime routine: bath, pajamas, teeth brushing. He read her a story, using sign language to narrate while she followed along in the book, her head resting against his shoulder. When he tucked her into bed and signed, "I love you," she signed back, "Love you more than all the buildings in the world." "Impossible," Evan signed. "That's my line." "We can share it," Lila signed, grinning. And then her eyes were closing, exhaustion finally claiming her. Evan watched her sleep for a moment, this miracle of a person who had made him better than he ever thought he could be. Then he retreated to the living room, pulled out his laptop, and began working on the renovation drawings that were due Friday. It was 11:30 p.m. when his phone buzzed with an email notification. Probably another bill, or a client request, or spam about architectural software he couldn't afford. Evan almost ignored it, but something made him check. The sender name made him pause. Wells and Avery Design Group. Evan stared at the name, his tired brain trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Wells and Avery was one of the premier architectural firms in the Northeast, the kind of firm that designed museums and concert halls and buildings that won awards. The kind of firm Evan had fantasized about working for when he was in architecture school, before reality and single fatherhood had reshaped his ambitions into something more survival-oriented. Why would Wells and Avery be emailing him? He clicked on the email, his heart starting to pound. "Dear Mr. Carter, my name is Harper Wells, CEO of Wells and Avery Design Group. I'm reaching out because my mother, Margaret Wells, insisted I contact you immediately upon her return home this evening." Evan's breath caught. Margaret, the woman from the airport. "My mother told me what you did for her today at Logan Airport. She told me that while dozens of people walked past her, you stopped. You helped her. You saw her. Mr. Carter, my mother has been deaf since birth. She spent her entire life navigating a world that often forgets she exists. In her 77 years, she's learned to expect very little from strangers. The fact that you not only stopped to help, but did so at the cost of nearly missing your own flight, she can't stop talking about it. She also told me you have a deaf daughter, that you learned sign language for her, that you understand what it means to be a voice in a silent world. I'd like to meet with you, Mr. Carter, not just to thank you personally for your kindness to my mother, but because I believe we might be able to help each other. Wells and Avery is currently working on a significant project that requires someone with both design expertise and authentic understanding of accessibility needs. Based on my mother's description of your character and compassion, I think you might be exactly who we're looking for. Would you be available for a meeting next week? I'm based in Boston, but happy to come to Hartford. Or we could meet somewhere in between. My assistant will coordinate whatever works best for your schedule. With sincere gratitude, Harper Wells, CEO, Wells and Avery Design Group. At the bottom of the email was a phone number and what appeared to be Harper Wells's direct email address, not filtered through an assistant or office manager. Evan read the email 3 times, convinced he was either hallucinating from exhaustion or had misunderstood something fundamental. Wells and Avery wanted to meet with him. Wells and Avery thought he might be right for a significant project. This didn't happen. Things like this didn't happen to architects who were one bad month away from bankruptcy, who worked out of their living rooms after their kids went to sleep, who'd long ago given up on the fantasy of designing anything more prestigious than residential renovations. And yet the email sat there on his screen, real and impossible in equal measure. Evan got up and paced his small living room, his mind racing. This could be everything. The break he'd been desperately needing, the chance to actually use his design skills on something meaningful, the financial stability that would let him breathe for the first time in years. Or it could be nothing. A polite gesture, a thank you meeting that led nowhere. False hope was worse than no hope at all. But Margaret's face flashed in his memory. Her relief when he'd stopped, her gratitude when they'd made the flight. "You gave me back my voice today," she'd signed. He hadn't done it for recognition. He hadn't done it for opportunity. He'd done it because it was right, because he understood what it meant to be invisible, because he couldn't walk past someone in need when he had the power to help. And maybe, just maybe, the universe was rewarding that. Evan returned to his laptop and typed a reply. "Dear Ms. Wells, thank you for your email. I'm deeply touched that your mother felt the need to reach out. Helping her was the right thing to do, no thanks necessary. That said, I would be honored to meet with you to discuss potential collaboration. I'm available next week and happy to work around your schedule. Please let me know what works best. Sincerely, Evan Carter." Carter and Associates. He hit send before he could second-guess the wording, the tone, the absurd presumption that he, struggling single dad architect, belonged in the same sentence as Wells and Avery Design Group. Then Evan closed his laptop, checked on Lila one more time, still sleeping peacefully, one arm flung over her stuffed elephant, and fell into bed. As sleep pulled him under, his last conscious thought was of Margaret's hands moving in that terminal, signing desperately for help, and of his own decision to stop, to see, to acknowledge her humanity. Sometimes the smallest choices reshape everything. Evan just didn't know yet how much this one would change his entire world. The next morning arrived with the sharp insistence of Lila's alarm clock vibrating under her pillow, a specialized alarm designed for deaf users that shook rather than rang. Evan heard the muffled buzzing through the thin wall between their bedrooms and smiled despite his exhaustion. He'd been awake since 5, unable to sleep after Harper Wells's email had detonated in his mind like a quiet bomb, reshaping the landscape of possibility. He'd drafted and deleted 3 follow-up emails before forcing himself to leave it alone. The reply he'd sent last night was professional, grateful, appropriately enthusiastic without seeming desperate. Adding anything else would only reveal the trembling hope he was trying so hard to contain. Evan rolled out of bed and padded to the kitchen, starting coffee before Lila emerged. Their morning routine was choreographed through years of practice. He'd make breakfast while she got dressed, they'd eat together while reviewing her schedule for the day, and then he'd drive her to school before heading home to work. Except this morning, his hands trembled slightly as he cracked eggs into a bowl. This morning, the familiar rhythm felt different, charged with the possibility that everything might be about to change. Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway in her school uniform, navy pants and a white polo shirt that she'd somehow already managed to wrinkle. Her hair was attempting escape from the ponytail she'd wrestled it into, and she carried her backpack and her tablet, which she set on the table while sliding into her chair. "Morning, sweetheart," Evan signed, one hand still whisking eggs. "How'd you sleep?" "Good," Lila signed back, then paused, studying his face with the unsettling perceptiveness 8-year-olds sometimes possessed. "You look different." "Different how?" Evan asked, pouring the eggs into the heated pan. "Happy different," Lila signed, tilting her head. "Did something good happen?" Evan considered how much to tell her. He didn't want to build up hope, his own or hers, about something that might amount to nothing, but he also tried never to lie to Lila, even through omission. "The woman I helped at the airport yesterday," he signed, pausing to flip the eggs. "Her daughter emailed me. She wants to meet." "Why?" Lila's hands moved quickly, curiosity lighting her features. "She runs an architecture company, a really important one. She might have a job for me." Lila's eyes widened. "A big job?" "Maybe," Evan signed, trying to keep his own excitement in check. "We'll see, but yes, it could be big." "Because you helped her mom?" "I think so." Lila considered this while Evan plated the eggs and set them on the table with toast and orange juice. She picked up her fork, then set it down again to sign. "That's good. You help people and good things happen." "It doesn't always work that way, Lila." "It should," she signed firmly, with the absolute moral certainty of childhood. "You're a good dad. You should get good things." Evan's throat tightened. He signed, "I already have the best thing. I have you." Lila rolled her eyes in that universal gesture of 8-year-old embarrassment, but she was smiling as she finally started eating her eggs. They finished breakfast and Evan drove her to school, watching in the rearview mirror as she signed with her best friend Maya in the parking lot before they disappeared into the building together. Maya's parents were deaf, and she'd been Lila's anchor since kindergarten, another signing kid in a mostly hearing school, someone who understood. Evan sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for Maya, for her parents who'd welcomed Lila into their family's orbit, for every person who'd made his daughter's world a little less lonely. Then he drove home, his mind already spinning back to Harper Wells's email and what it might mean. The response came at 10:37 a.m. Evan had been staring at his laptop, ostensibly working on the renovation drawings, but actually refreshing his email every 3 minutes like a teenager waiting for a text from a crush. When the notification finally appeared, Wells and Avery Design Group, his heart performed an acrobatic leap that would have impressed Olympic judges. The email was from someone named Patricia Lansing, executive assistant to Harper Wells, and it was precisely the kind of efficient, professional communication Evan had expected from a firm of Wells and Avery's caliber. "Dear Mr. Carter, Ms. Wells asked me to reach out regarding scheduling a meeting. She's available this Thursday, November 16th at 2 p.m. at our Boston office, or if that doesn't work with your schedule, she's happy to arrange an alternative time and location. Please let me know your availability at your earliest convenience. I'll send full address and parking information once we confirm. Best regards, Patricia Lansing, Executive Assistant to Harper Wells." Thursday, 2 days away. Evan's mind immediately began cataloging obstacles. He had a client call Thursday afternoon that he'd need to reschedule. He'd have to arrange for Mrs. Chen to pick up Lila from school. He'd need to drive to Boston, which meant gas money he hadn't budgeted for this week. And he'd definitely need to do something about the sport coat that had been living on the back of his desk chair for the past 3 months and probably smelled like desperation and coffee. But none of those obstacles mattered. None of them were real barriers, just logistics to be solved. This was Wells and Avery. This was the opportunity he'd stopped dreaming about because dreaming hurt too much when reality kept insisting on disappointment. Evan typed his response. "Dear Ms. Lansing, Thursday at 2 p.m. works perfectly. I'll be there. Thank you for coordinating. Best regards, Evan Carter." He hit send, then immediately stood up and walked to his closet, pulling out the sport coat in question. It definitely needed dry cleaning. Also, when had his professional wardrobe deteriorated to one wrinkled sport coat, 2 dress shirts that mostly fit, and exactly 1 pair of pants without a coffee stain? Single dad problems, he thought wryly. Fashion took a back seat when you were juggling work, childcare, and trying to keep the lights on. Evan called Mrs. Chen, who agreed to pick up Lila on Thursday with her typical grace. "Of course, Evan, you go to your big meeting. Lila and I will have fun. Maybe I'll even make broccoli again." "You're a cruel woman, Mrs. Chen," Evan said, smiling. "Someone has to make sure she eats vegetables," Mrs. Chen replied. "You feed her too much cheese." She wasn't wrong. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt both excessive and inadequate. Evan got his sport coat dry cleaned, bought a new shirt he couldn't afford, printed out copies of his portfolio, which looked painfully thin next to what he imagined Wells and Avery's typical collaborators presented, and practiced what he'd say approximately 4,000 times. "Hi, I'm Evan Carter. Thank you for meeting with me." Too formal. "Hey, thanks for reaching out. Your mom is great." Too casual. "I'm honored to be here." Too desperate. Lila caught him practicing in the bathroom mirror Wednesday night and signed, "Dad, you're being weird." "I'm nervous," Evan signed back honestly. "Don't be," Lila signed. "Just be you. You're good at being you." Out of the mouths of babes, Evan thought. Or hands of babes, technically. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, November pretending briefly to be September. Evan dropped Lila at school, drove home to change into his interview outfit, the new shirt, the newly cleaned sport coat, the pants that were hopefully stain-free in dim lighting, and then headed north toward Boston. Traffic cooperated for once, and Evan found himself pulling into the parking garage at 1:30 p.m., a full half-hour early. The Wells and Avery office was located in a renovated historic building in the Seaport District, all red brick and enormous windows, the kind of adaptive reuse project that Evan loved, honoring history while creating something new and functional. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to calm his racing heart. Through the windshield, he could see other professionals walking past, people in sharp suits carrying leather briefcases, people who looked like they belonged in buildings like this, who moved through the world with the confidence of success. Evan looked down at his sport coat, noticing for the first time a small thread pull near the third button. Great. Perfect. He'd show up to meet with one of the premier architectural firms in the Northeast looking like he'd borrowed his dad's clothes and failed to return them. "You're good at being you?" Lila's signs echoed in his memory. Right. He could do this. He'd stopped to help an elderly woman in an airport because it was the right thing to do, and somehow that simple act of human decency had led him here. He just needed to be honest, professional, and himself. At 1:50 p.m., Evan entered the building's lobby. The interior was stunning, soaring ceilings, the original brick walls exposed and sealed, modern furniture arranged in conversation clusters, and photographs of Wells and Avery's completed projects displayed on the walls. Evan recognized several: a contemporary art museum in Providence, a community performing arts center in Springfield, a mixed-use development in Portland that had won multiple sustainability awards. These weren't just buildings. They were statements, each one thoughtfully designed to serve its community while pushing the boundaries of what architecture could be. And he was here, about to meet with the woman who'd led the design on most of them. Evan approached the reception desk, where a young man with perfectly styled hair and impressive cheekbones looked up with a professional smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I'm Evan Carter. I have a 2 o'clock appointment with Harper Wells." The receptionist typed something into his computer. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Ms. Lansing will be right down. Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." The receptionist handed him a glass bottle of water that probably cost more than Evan's lunch budget for a week, then gestured toward the seating area. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Evan sat in a chair that was somehow both beautiful and deeply uncomfortable, the curse of architect-designed furniture, he thought, and tried not to fidget. Around him, employees moved through the lobby with purpose, all of them looking competent and accomplished, and like they'd never worried about making rent. "Mr. Carter?" Evan looked up to find a woman in her 50s approaching, wearing a navy dress and carrying a tablet. She had the efficient air of someone who managed complex schedules with ruthless precision. "I'm Patricia Lansing," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," Evan replied, shaking her hand and trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Ms. Wells is ready for you, if you'll follow me." They entered an elevator with walls made entirely of glass, offering a dizzying view of the lobby, falling away beneath them as they rose. Patricia made pleasant small talk about traffic and weather, the conversational equivalent of elevator music, while Evan tried not to think about the fact that his entire professional future might be decided in the next hour. The elevator opened onto the 4th floor, and Patricia led him down a hallway lined with more project photographs. Evan recognized the work immediately. Harper Wells's signature style combined bold geometric forms with unexpected warmth, creating buildings that felt both cutting-edge and human-scaled. They stopped outside a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a door that stood slightly ajar. Patricia knocked once, then pushed it open. "Ms. Wells, Mr. Carter is here." "Thank you, Patricia. Send him in." Evan took a breath and walked through the door into what might be the most beautiful office he'd ever seen. The space was flooded with natural light from windows that overlooked Boston Harbor. A large desk sat at one end, but the rest of the room was arranged more like a living room. Comfortable chairs, a sofa, a coffee table covered with architectural magazines and what looked like project models. And standing by the window, backlit by afternoon sun, was Harper Wells. She was younger than Evan had expected, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed him in approximately 2 seconds. She wore dark pants and a cream-colored blouse, professional but not stuffy, and moved forward with her hand extended. "Mr. Carter, I'm Harper Wells. Thank you so much for coming." Evan shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "Please, call me Evan, and thank you for inviting me. Your office is incredible." "The building helps," Harper said with a slight smile. The architects who did the renovation understood what they were working with. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea, something stronger?" "I'm fine, thank you." Harper gestured toward the seating area. "Please sit. And Evan, I should tell you right away, my mother hasn't stopped talking about you since Tuesday. She called me from the airport the moment she landed, which is unusual because she usually prefers to text. But she needed to tell me immediately about the man who stopped." Evan sat in one of the chairs, trying not to be distracted by how comfortable it was. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped her find her gate." "That's not how she tells it," Harper said, settling into the chair across from him. And then, to Evan's complete surprise, she began to sign. "She said you ran through the airport with her, that you almost missed your flight making sure she made hers, that you treated her like a person instead of a problem." The shift to sign language was so smooth, so natural, that it took Evan a moment to respond. When he did, his hands moved almost automatically. "You sign?" "Fluently," Harper signed back, her expression softening. "My mother has been deaf since birth. ASL was my first language, technically. I learned to speak later." She switched back to verbal communication, though her hands continued moving in small gestures. "I can do either, or both. Whatever's comfortable for you." "Verbal is fine," Evan said, though something in his chest had loosened at the sight of her signing. "But it's nice to meet someone else who signs. In professional settings, I mean. It's not something I encounter often." "I imagine not," Harper said. "Most architectural firms aren't exactly known for their accessibility consciousness." She leaned back in her chair, studying him with open curiosity. "My mother said you have a deaf daughter." "Lila?" "Yes, she's 8. She's—" Evan paused, trying to find words adequate to describe his daughter. "She's everything." "Tell me about her." It wasn't what Evan had expected. He'd thought they'd jump straight into discussing projects, portfolios, professional qualifications. But Harper was watching him with genuine interest, so he answered honestly. "She was born hearing," Evan explained. "We didn't realize anything was wrong until she was about 18 months old. She wasn't responding to sounds, wasn't developing speech like she should. The diagnosis was profound sensorineural hearing loss in both ears. Permanent, irreversible." Harper nodded, her expression understanding. "Her mother, my ex-wife, she couldn't handle it," Evan continued, the old anger still there, but muted now by time and therapy. "She left when Lila was 5. Said she didn't sign up to raise a special needs child." He shook his head. "But Lila's not special needs. She's just deaf. She's smart, funny, creative. She wants to be an architect someday, actually. Designs elaborate buildings out of cardboard boxes and duct tape." "Good materials to start with," Harper said, and there was warmth in her voice now, a crack in the professional veneer. "My mother raised me alone, too. My father left when I was 6 months old. Couldn't handle having a deaf wife, apparently." She said it matter-of-factly, but Evan heard the old wound beneath the words. "I'm sorry," Evan said. "Don't be. She did a remarkable job without him. Became a teacher, raised me, never let anyone make her feel less than whole." Harper paused. "But it wasn't easy. I watched her be dismissed, ignored, treated as invisible countless times. So when she called me Tuesday night crying because a stranger had stopped, had seen her, had helped her, she stopped, composing herself. It mattered, Evan, more than you probably realize. The use of his first name felt significant, a shift from formal to personal. I'm glad I could help, Evan said simply. I know what it's like watching someone you love navigate a world that doesn't always make space for them. That's exactly why I wanted to meet you, Harper said, leaning forward. Not just to thank you, though I do thank you sincerely, but because Wells and Avery has a project that needs someone with your particular insight. Finally, the real reason he was here. Evan felt his pulse quicken. Harper stood and walked to her desk, retrieving a portfolio that she brought back to the seating area. She opened it to reveal architectural renderings of a large modern building with clean lines and lots of glass. This is the Hartford Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Harper said. It's a $20 million project funded by a combination of state grants and private donations. The building will house educational programs, social services, performance space, and community gathering areas specifically designed for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Evan leaned forward, studying the renderings. They were good, clean, modern, accessible, but something about them felt off, though he couldn't immediately identify what. We won the bid 6 months ago, Harper continued. Design development is almost complete, but my lead designer quit 3 weeks ago, personal reasons, moved to California. And when I reviewed his work, I realized something. She paused, meeting Evan's eyes. It's technically accessible. It meets ADA requirements, but it doesn't understand the community it's meant to serve. What do you mean? Evan asked, though he thought he might already know. Look at the auditorium design, Harper said, pointing to one of the renderings. The sight lines are obstructed by pillars. That's a disaster for a deaf audience that needs clear visual access to interpreters and performers. The lighting design creates shadows that make signing difficult to see. The acoustics were prioritized, which is absurd for a space that will primarily serve deaf users. She flipped to another page. The wayfinding signage is all text-based with no visual symbols. The door hardware requires sound-based alerts. Even the layout of the social spaces assumes verbal communication patterns. Evan could see it now, all the small failures that added up to a building that worked on paper but would fail the people it was meant to serve. It's not malicious, Harper said. My lead designer is talented, but he designed for theoretical deaf users, not real ones. He checked boxes without understanding what the boxes meant. So what do you need? Evan asked, though his heart was already racing with the possibilities. I need someone who understands that accessibility isn't just about ramps and braille, Harper said. Someone who's lived it, who knows what it means to navigate the world differently. I need someone to redesign this building from the inside out, to make it not just accessible, but welcoming. And when my mother told me about you, about your daughter, about your compassion, about the fact that you nearly missed your flight to help her, I thought maybe you could be that someone. Evan stared at the renderings, his mind already spinning with ideas. Curved sight lines instead of straight ones, open floor plans that allowed visual communication across distances, lighting designed not for mood but for visibility, materials that enhanced rather than obstructed spatial awareness. I'm not trying to steal you from your current work, Harper continued. This would be a consulting role, at least initially. You'd work with our team, provide insight, help us understand what we're missing. If it goes well, there might be opportunities for more involvement, maybe even a permanent position. She named a consulting rate that made Evan's breath catch. It was more than he'd made in the past 6 months combined. Evan started, then stopped. His instinct was to say yes immediately, to grab this opportunity with both hands before it evaporated like a dream. But years of disappointment had taught him caution. Can I ask why me? You must know other architects with accessibility experience. Probably architects with actual credentials beyond a struggling one-man firm and a portfolio of residential renovations. Harper smiled, and it transformed her face from professional to genuine. Honestly? Because my mother trusts you, and I trust my mother's judgment more than any resume. She said you saw her, Evan, not her disability, not her age, not her need. You saw her as a person first. That's exactly the perspective this project needs. When would you need me to start? Evan asked, trying to keep the hope out of his voice. How about Monday? Harper said. Come to Boston, spend the day with the design team, review the existing plans. We'll see how it feels, whether this is a good fit. No commitment beyond that first day. Just see what you think. Evan thought about his current projects, the renovation drawings due Friday, the proposal he needed to submit next week. He thought about his bank account with its alarming balance, about the rent due in days, about all the practical reasons he should negotiate, should ask for time to consider. Then he thought about Lila, about the world he wanted to help build for her. A world where buildings spoke her language, where design considered her needs not as afterthoughts, but as central requirements. "I'll be here Monday," Evan said. "What time?" 9 a.m. Patricia will send you all the details." Harper stood, extending her hand again. "Thank you, Evan. I have a feeling this is going to be something special." They shook hands, and Evan felt the weight of the moment, how a choice made in an airport terminal on Tuesday afternoon had led to this handshake, this opportunity, this potential future he'd stopped letting himself imagine. "Can I ask you something?" Evan said as Harper walked him to the door. "Of course." "Why architecture? I mean, you grew up with a deaf mother. You learned to navigate accessibility issues young. What made you want to design buildings?" Harper paused, her hand on the door frame. "Because buildings shape how we experience the world," she said simply. "They can include or exclude, welcome or alienate. I wanted to create spaces that included everyone, that didn't make people fight for accommodation, but built it in from the start." She smiled. "My mother says I have a savior complex. Maybe she's right, but if I'm going to have a complex, at least it's a useful one." Evan laughed. "I understand that completely." Patricia appeared to escort Evan back to the elevator, and he followed her down the hallway in a daze, barely registering her friendly chatter about parking validation and next steps. His mind was spinning with possibilities, with designs already forming, with the future suddenly looking less like a struggle and more like potential. In the elevator, watching the floors descend through glass walls, Evan pulled out his phone. He needed to tell someone, needed to share this moment before it burst out of his chest. He texted Mrs. Chen first. "Meeting went amazing. We'll tell you everything later. Thank you for getting Lila." Then he opened a new message to Lila, knowing she'd check it after school. "Big news, sweetheart. Dad might have a really exciting new project. Can't wait to tell you about it. Love you more than all the buildings in the world." The response came faster than expected. Lila must have been at lunch, checking her phone between bites. "Love you more than all the buildings and all the mac and cheese. Did you get the job?" "Not yet, but maybe soon. Cross your fingers for me." "I don't need to cross my fingers," Lila texted back. "You're the best architect. They're lucky to have you." Evan stood in the parking garage, reading his daughter's message 3 times, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, unafraid hope. The drive back to Hartford passed in a blur of thoughts and plans. Evan's mind was already working on the community center design, seeing all the ways it could be better, more inclusive, more thoughtful. He'd need to research current best practices, talk to members of the deaf community, study other accessible designs. He'd need to prepare for Monday, to make sure his first day with the Wells and Avery team demonstrated that Harper's faith in him wasn't misplaced. He picked up Lila from Mrs. Chen's at 5:30, and his daughter immediately began signing questions before he'd even fully entered the apartment. "Tell me everything. What was the office like? Was the woman nice? Did you see cool buildings? Are you going to work there? When do you start?" "Slow down," Evan signed, laughing. "Let me breathe first." They sat at the kitchen table, and Evan told her everything. About the office overlooking the harbor, about Harper, who signed fluently because of her deaf mother, about the community center project that needed redesigning, about the possibility of starting Monday. Lila's eyes grew wider with each detail. When Evan finished, she was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she signed, "This happened because you helped that woman." "Maybe," Evan signed, "or maybe it was just good timing." "No," Lila signed firmly. "You helped her because you're good, and now good things are happening because that's how it should work." Evan wanted to tell her that the world didn't always work that way, that kindness wasn't always rewarded, that good people struggled while selfish ones succeeded. But looking at his daughter's face, so full of certainty and pride, he couldn't bring himself to dim that light. "You're right," he signed instead. That's exactly how it should work. That night, after Lila was asleep, Evan sat at his desk and opened the rendering Harper had emailed him. She'd sent it with a note. Start thinking about it. No pressure. He stared at the building design, at all its technical competence and fundamental misunderstanding, and began to sketch. Not formal drawings, not anything he'd show anyone, just explorations. What if the sightlines curved? What if the lighting came from multiple angles? What if the circulation patterns assumed visual rather than verbal communication? He worked until past midnight, filling page after page with rough ideas, his hand cramping but his mind fully alive for the first time in months. This was why he'd become an architect, not to design trophy houses for wealthy clients, but to create spaces that served communities, that solved real problems, that made people's lives measurably better. His phone buzzed with an email notification around 1 a.m. Harper Wells. I meant it about no pressure, but I'm glad you're thinking about it anyway. See you Monday. Sleep well. Evan smiled at his laptop screen. He typed back, "Thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down." Her response came immediately, like she'd been awake too. "I know you won't. My mother has excellent judgment about people. She said you have a good heart. That matters more than credentials." Evan sat back in his chair, reading those words several times. When was the last time someone had evaluated him on character rather than resume? When was the last time heart mattered more than experience? He thought about Margaret Wells sitting alone in that terminal, signing desperately for help. He thought about stopping, about making that choice to see her, to help her, to miss his flight if necessary. Such a small moment, such enormous consequences. Evan finally closed his laptop and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. His mind kept spinning with designs, possibilities, the intoxicating feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change. In the next room, Lila slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds dreamed. And somewhere in Connecticut, Margaret Wells was probably sleeping too, unaware that her gratitude had reshaped her daughter's business and a struggling architect's future in a single afternoon. Sometimes the world worked the way it should. Sometimes kindness was rewarded. Sometimes stopping to help a stranger led exactly where you needed to go. Evan fell asleep thinking about buildings that welcomed everyone, about spaces designed with love, and about the incredible power of simply choosing to see. Yui Tra Loi Trong Muk Tin Yun Komye Sang document Part 3 Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline November cold that made Boston's harbor shimmer like hammered silver. Evan had been awake since 5, had checked his appearance in the mirror approximately 15 times, and had rehearsed what he'd say to Harper's design team until the words lost all meaning and became just sounds in his mouth. Lila had been awake too, appearing in his doorway at 6 with her hair still wild from sleep, signing, "You're going to be amazing today." "How do you know?" Evan had signed back, grateful for her confidence even as his own wavered. "Because you always are," she'd signed simply, then crawled into his lap for a hug that steadied something fundamental in his chest. Now, standing outside the Wells and Avery building at 8:45, Evan took a deep breath and pushed through the glass doors. The same receptionist from Thursday greeted him with recognition and a smile that seemed genuine rather than professionally mandated. "Mr. Carter, good morning. Ms. Lansing is expecting you. 4th floor again." The elevator ride felt both eternal and instantaneous. When the doors opened, Patricia was already waiting, tablet in hand, and expression efficient. "Evan, welcome. Harper's in the conference room with the team. Ready?" "Ready," Evan lied, following her down a different hallway than Thursday's route. This one opened into a large conference room with windows overlooking the harbor and a massive table surrounded by at least a dozen people. Harper stood at the head of the table, and when she saw Evan, her face brightened with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Everyone, this is Evan Carter. Evan, this is the team that's going to help us make the Hartford Community Center something extraordinary." The introductions blurred together. Michael, the project architect, Sarah, the lighting designer, David, who handled structural engineering, Rachel from interiors, James, the landscape architect. Each of them nodded or shook Evan's hand, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to welcoming. Evan noticed one man in particular, probably late 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, who looked at him with undisguised assessment. Harper noticed the look too. "And this is Robert Chang, our senior partner and the firm's co-founder," Harper said smoothly. "Robert, Evan is consulting with us on accessibility design for Hartford." "Consulting," Robert repeated, the word somehow carrying weight. "What firm are you with, Evan?" "Carter and Associates," Evan said, meeting Robert's gaze steadily. "It's a small firm. Actually, it's just me." "I see," Robert said, and those two words contained volumes of doubt. "And your experience with projects of this scale?" "Limited," Evan admitted, because lying would only make things worse. "But my experience with the deaf community is extensive. I've spent the last 8 years learning what works and what doesn't, what includes and what excludes. That's the perspective Harper asked me to bring." "Harper has excellent instincts," Robert said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "I trust we'll see the value of your contribution." The implicit challenge hung in the air like smoke. Harper's expression remained pleasant, but Evan caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Why don't we start with where we are?" Harper said, moving smoothly past the tension. "Michael, want to walk Evan through the current design?" For the next hour, Michael presented the existing plans in exhaustive detail. The building was impressive on paper, 40,000 square feet of modern design with classrooms, a performance space, administrative offices, and community gathering areas. Everything was technically accessible, meeting or exceeding ADA requirements. The budget was meticulously planned, the timeline ambitious but achievable, and the renderings beautiful. And yet, watching the presentation, Evan felt the same disconnect he'd sensed in Harper's office on Thursday. The building was designed for deaf people, but not with them. It accommodated disability rather than celebrating difference. When Michael finished, Harper turned to Evan. "Thoughts?" Every person in the room was looking at him now, some curious, some skeptical, Robert openly doubtful. Evan could feel the weight of judgment, could sense that his next words would determine whether he was taken seriously or dismissed as Harper's charitable project. He thought about Lila, about all the times she'd walked into spaces that hadn't considered her needs. He thought about Margaret Wells, invisible in an airport terminal. He thought about why Harper had asked him here in the first place. "It's good work," Evan said carefully, standing and moving toward the renderings displayed on the wall. "Technically proficient, aesthetically pleasing, but it's missing something fundamental." He pointed to the auditorium design. "This space assumes hearing is the primary sense. Look at the speaker placement, the acoustic panels, the sound booth at the back. Those are important for hard-of-hearing users with assistive devices, but for profoundly deaf users, they're irrelevant." Michael shifted in his seat, defensive. "We included visual alert systems throughout." "You did," Evan agreed. "But they're add-ons, not integrated design elements. And the sightlines?" He traced the pillar placement with his finger. "These obstruct visual access to the stage. For an audience that needs to see interpreters, performers, everyone in the room, these pillars are barriers." "Structural necessity," David, the engineer, interjected. "We need those supports." "Then the solution is to rethink the entire structural system," Evan said, warming to his subject now despite his nerves. "What if instead of traditional pillars, we used a different load-bearing approach? What if the structure itself enhanced rather than obstructed visibility?" He pulled out his phone, opening the photos of sketches he'd made over the weekend. They were rough, preliminary, but they showed what he meant. Curved walls that carried structural loads while creating unobstructed sightlines, ceiling designs that eliminated columns, spatial arrangements that assumed visual communication patterns. Sarah, the lighting designer, leaned forward with interest. "Show me more about the lighting concerns." Evan pulled up another sketch. "Deaf communication depends on being able to see clearly. That means lighting from multiple angles to eliminate shadows, consistent color temperature so faces aren't distorted, and brightness levels that allow comfortable visual focus without eye strain. Your current design has beautiful ambient lighting, but it creates shadows across signing space." "That's a valid point," Sarah said slowly, her skepticism shifting to engagement. "I was designing for atmosphere, not functionality." "Can it be both?" Evan asked. "Can't we create beautiful lighting that also serves the community's needs?" "In theory," Sarah said. "In practice, That's expensive. Maybe, Evan said. Or maybe we're thinking about it wrong. What if we designed the building to maximize natural light, use the architecture itself to create the illumination we need? It might actually save money on electrical systems. Robert spoke up from his position at the table, his tone still measured. These are interesting ideas, Mr. Carter, but we're already deep into design development. Significant changes at this stage would require going back to schematic design, which means delays and budget overruns. The client isn't going to be happy about that. The client is the deaf and hard of hearing community, Evan said, meeting Robert's gaze. And I think they'd rather have a building that's delayed 6 months but actually serves them than one that's on time but fundamentally misses the mark. That's a noble sentiment, Robert said, but it's not how real-world architecture works. Budgets matter. Timelines matter. Client expectations matter. So does getting it right, Harper interjected quietly, and everyone's attention shifted to her. Robert, I hear your concerns, but Evan's right. We can't deliver a building that fails the community it's meant to serve just because we're afraid of making changes. She turned to Evan. What would you need to develop these ideas into something we could actually present to the client? Evan's heart raced. This was the moment, the chance to prove himself, or the opportunity to fail spectacularly in front of a room full of accomplished professionals. Time with the community, he said. I need to talk to deaf and hard of hearing people about what they actually need. Not what we think they need, but what they know from lived experience. And I need access to your team's expertise to develop solutions that are both meaningful and feasible. Timeline? Harper asked. 2 weeks to gather community input and develop preliminary redesigns. Another 2 weeks to integrate those with structural and systems requirements. A month total before we present to the client. A month, Robert repeated. We're supposed to present final design development in 3 weeks. Then we push the presentation back a month, Harper said, and her tone carried the weight of final decision. This is too important to rush. We do it right, or we don't do it at all. She looked around the table. I need everyone's commitment that we're going to support Evan in this process. Michael, you'll work with him on spatial design. Sarah, lighting. David, structural solutions. Everyone brings their expertise, but Evan leads on accessibility considerations. Agreed? There was a long moment of silence. Then Michael nodded slowly. Agreed. And honestly, I'm curious to see where this goes. I've never designed for this community before. Not really. I want to learn. Sarah nodded too. Same. I'm in. One by one, the team members indicated their agreement. Even Robert, though his expression remained reservedly skeptical, said, I'm trusting your judgment on this, Harper, but I want regular progress updates. You'll have them, Harper promised. She turned to Evan. Welcome to the team. Patricia will get you set up with building access, email, whatever you need. When can you start community outreach? This week, Evan said. I have contacts in the Hartford deaf community through my daughter's school. I can reach out today. Perfect. Keep me updated on what you learn. Harper checked her watch. I have a call in 10 minutes, but let's plan to meet Friday afternoon to review your initial findings. Everyone good with that? The meeting dispersed, team members gathering their materials and heading back to their respective offices. Evan found himself alone with Harper as the room cleared, and she gave him a look that was equal parts conspiratorial and concerned. You did well, she signed, switching to ASL now that they were alone. Robert's going to take some convincing, but the rest of the team is on board. Did I just completely derail your project? Evan signed back, anxiety creeping in now that the adrenaline was fading. You potentially just saved it, Harper signed. I've been feeling uneasy about the design for weeks, but couldn't articulate why. You gave voice to my concerns. She smiled. Or hands to my concerns, technically. Evan laughed, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. There's someone I want you to meet, Harper said, switching back to speech. Come with me. She led him down another hallway to a smaller office where an elderly woman sat at a desk covered with photographs and architectural drawings. When she looked up and saw Harper, her face lit with joy. And then she saw Evan, and her expression transformed into something even brighter. Margaret Wells stood from her desk, and Evan realized with a start that she worked here, in this office, surrounded by her daughter's projects. You, Margaret signed, moving around the desk with surprising speed. You came back. "This is the man I told you about, Mom," Harper said, signing along with her words. "Evan Carter, meet my mother, Margaret Wells, our unofficial office manager and official quality control specialist." "You work here?" Evan signed to Margaret, delighted and surprised. "3 days a week," Margaret signed back. "I organize Harper's chaos, make sure she eats lunch, and remind everyone that beautiful buildings mean nothing if people can't use them." Her eyes sparkled with humor. "I'm very annoying." "You're very right," Harper signed, and the affection between mother and daughter was palpable. "I told Harper about you," Margaret signed to Evan. "I told her you were special, that you saw me, and now you're here, helping design a building for our community." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing an old woman who needed help." "You're not old," Evan signed automatically, making Margaret laugh. "I'm 77, she signed. "I'm definitely old. But I'm not invisible anymore, thanks to you." The words hit Evan harder than he expected. He thought about all the times he'd worried about Lila growing up in a world that might not see her, might not value her, might treat her as less than. And here was Margaret, 77 years of navigating that world, still fighting to be seen. "I have a daughter," Evan signed slowly. "She's 8. She's deaf. I worry every day about the world she's growing up in." "Then you build her a better one," Margaret signed firmly. "That's what we do. We take the world as it is and we make it better for the next generation. You're doing that now." She gestured around the office. "Harper does it with buildings. You'll do it with her. Together, you'll create spaces where your daughter and others like her are seen, valued, included." Harper was watching this exchange with an expression Evan couldn't quite read, something soft and thoughtful crossing her features. "Mom's right," Harper said, signing along. "That's exactly what we're trying to do here, and I think you're the missing piece we needed." Patricia appeared in the doorway. "Harper, your 9:30 is here." "Right," Harper said. "Mom, can you help Evan get settled, office space, access badges, all that?" "Of course," Margaret signed. "Go to your meeting. I'll take care of him." Harper left, and Margaret turned to Evan with purpose. "Come, I'll show you where you'll be working." She led him to a small office 3 doors down from Harper's. Nothing fancy, but with good natural light and a desk that didn't wobble. This was Daniel's office, the designer who left. "It's yours now for as long as you need it." Evan set his messenger bag on the desk, still processing the fact that he had an office at Wells and Avery, that this was actually happening. "Can I ask you something?" he signed to Margaret as she helped him figure out the computer login. "Anything," she signed back. "What made you call Harper about me?" "You didn't know anything about me except that I helped you in the airport." Margaret paused, her hands stilling. Then she signed slowly, thoughtfully. "In 77 years, I've encountered thousands of hearing people. Most of them are kind when forced to interact with me. Some are patient. A few are genuinely good. But you," she met his eyes, "you saw me as a person first, not as a deaf person, not as an elderly person, not as a problem. Just as someone who needed help. That's rare. That's special. And I knew anyone who could see me that clearly would see my community clearly too." "I just did what anyone should do," Evan signed. "But most people don't," Margaret signed back. "That's the difference. You did what should be normal, what should be automatic. And because you did, you're here. You're going to help create something that will serve my community for generations." She smiled. "The universe rewards good hearts, Evan. Not always, not quickly, but eventually. Trust that." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of administrative setup, email accounts, building access, introductions to other staff members. Evan called the Hartford Center for the Deaf around noon, speaking with their community outreach coordinator about arranging focus groups with deaf and hard of hearing residents who would be the primary users of the new building. "We'd be thrilled to help," the coordinator said. "We've been worried about the building design, honestly. The renderings they showed us looked beautiful, but felt like they missed something essential. If you're trying to fix that, we're absolutely on board." Evan scheduled 3 focus group sessions for later that week, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. These weren't just architectural problems to solve, they were real people's lived experiences he needed to honor. He worked through lunch, sketching preliminary ideas and researching case studies of successful deaf-accessible architecture. Around 2 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a text from Lila, who must have been at lunch break at school. The message was a video of her signing, and Evan played it with his volume off, reading her hands. "How's your first day? Are you designing amazing buildings? Don't forget to eat lunch. Love you." The video responded immediately, signing, "First day is good. I'm learning a lot. And yes, I forgot lunch, but I'll eat something soon. Love you more than all the buildings in the world. See you tonight." Lila's response came seconds later, another video of her signing dramatically, "I knew you'd forget lunch. Dad, you need to take care of yourself." 8 years old and already mothering him. Evan smiled and tucked his phone away, making a mental note to actually find something to eat. He was deep in research about optimal lighting conditions for sign language visibility when Harper knocked on his open door around 3. "How's it going?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Good, I think. I've got focus groups scheduled for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in Hartford. I'm trying to prepare questions that will actually get at what people need versus what they think we want to hear." "Smart," Harper said. She hesitated, then asked, "Want to grab coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss." They walked to a cafe 2 blocks from the office, the November wind sharp off the harbor. Harper ordered an Americano, Evan a regular coffee he couldn't really afford, but felt obligated to buy in a professional setting, and they settled at a small table by the window. "I want to be honest with you about something," Harper said, cradling her cup between both hands. "Robert's not wrong about the challenges here. Redesigning at this stage is expensive and complicated. The client is already anxious about timeline, and bringing you in—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some people are going to see it as me making an emotional decision rather than a professional one." "Is that what you think?" Evan asked quietly. "No," Harper said immediately. "I think it's the right call professionally and ethically. But I need you to know that you're going to face skepticism. People are going to question your credentials, your experience, whether you belong at this table." She met his eyes. "I'm telling you this not to discourage you, but so you're prepared." "I appreciate that," Evan said. "And honestly, I question whether I belong here too. I spent half the morning wondering when someone's going to realize I have no idea what I'm doing." Harper smiled slightly. "That's called imposter syndrome, and every architect I know has it. The difference is most of them fake confidence better." She took a sip of her coffee. "But here's what I see when I look at you, Evan. I see someone who understands our community not from textbooks or professional training, but from lived experience. I see someone who stopped in an airport to help a stranger when they had every reason to keep walking. I see someone who's raising a deaf daughter in a world that doesn't always accommodate her, which means you've been fighting accessibility battles every single day for 8 years. She leaned forward. "That's not imposter syndrome. That's expertise they didn't teach in architecture school." Evan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "Thank you for saying that." "I mean it," Harper said. "And I'm saying it now because over the next few weeks, you're going to need to remember it. When Robert questions your decisions, when clients push back on changes, when the team resists new ideas, remember that you belong at that table. Your perspective matters." They finished their coffee and walked back to the office, and Evan felt fortified somehow, steadier. Harper believed in him, Margaret believed in him, and somewhere in Hartford, Lila believed in him without question. Maybe that was enough. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into research and planning. Around 5:30, Evan realized he needed to leave soon to pick up Lila from Mrs. Chen's, and he started packing up his messenger bag. He was shutting down his computer when Harper appeared in his doorway again. "Heading out?" she asked. "Yeah, I need to get my daughter," Evan said. "But I'll be back tomorrow morning. I want to review those structural drawings more carefully before the focus groups." "Evan," Harper said, and something in her tone made him pause. "I know you're commuting from Hartford. That's an hour each way minimum. Have you thought about how sustainable that is?" "I'll make it work," Evan said automatically, though he had been wondering the same thing. 2 hours of driving every day meant 2 hours less with Lila, 2 hours less sleep, 2 hours of gas money he needed to budget for. "What if there was another option?" Harper said carefully. "We have a corporate apartment in the North End that we keep for out-of-town collaborators. It's empty right now. You're welcome to use it during the week if that would help. Stay over a few nights, save the commute, give yourself more time to focus on the project. Evan started to refuse automatically. It felt like too much, like taking advantage of Harper's generosity. But then he thought about the math. If he stayed in Boston 3 nights a week, he'd save 6 hours of driving time, probably $100 in gas money, and gain space to think without the constant pressure of rushing home. I couldn't, he started. You could, Harper interrupted gently. And before you argue, know that we're not doing you a favor. You're doing us one. This project needs your full focus, and if eliminating a brutal commute helps you give us your best work, that's a business decision, not charity. I'd need to be home for Lila, Evan said. Tuesday nights especially. That's our tradition. Mac and cheese night. I can't miss that. So stay Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Harper suggested. Drive home Tuesday and Friday. Spend weekends with your daughter. You get the benefit of focused work time. She doesn't lose her dad. She smiled. Everyone wins. It made sense. It made so much sense that Evan's resistance crumbled under the weight of logic. Okay, he said finally. Thank you, really, thank you. The apartment key will be waiting with Patricia tomorrow, Harper said. Now go. Your daughter's waiting. The drive back to Hartford felt different somehow, lighter. Evan called Mrs. Chen from the car, letting her know he was running a few minutes late, and she assured him Lila was fine, currently beating her at cards for the 3rd time in a row. When Evan picked up his daughter, Lila immediately started signing questions faster than he could process them. How was it? What did you do? Did you design things? Are the people nice? When do you start? I already started, Evan signed, pulling her into a hug. Today was my first day. And? Lila signed emphatically when he released her. And it was good, really good. I'm going to help redesign a community center for deaf people in Hartford. I'm going to make it better for people like you. Lila's eyes went wide. Like me? Exactly like you. So that when you grow up, there will be more buildings that work for you, that include you, that were designed with you in mind from the start. That's the best job ever, Lila signed, and her pride in him was so evident, so pure, that Evan felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. I think so too, he signed back. That night, after they'd had dinner and Lila was settled with her homework, Evan's phone rang with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Evan Carter? Speaking. This is William Torres. I'm the executive director of the Hartford Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I heard from Harper Wells today that you're joining the design team. Evan's stomach clenched. This was the client, the person whose opinion mattered most. Yes, that's right. I hope it's the best news I've had in months, William interrupted, warmth flooding his voice. Between you and me, I've been worried about the design since I first saw it. Beautiful building, but it felt like it was designed for hearing people's idea of what deaf people need rather than what we actually need. When Harper told me your background, your experience, your daughter, he paused. This is exactly what the project needs. I'm so grateful you're on board. Evan released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Thank you. That means a lot. I have focus groups scheduled this week to gather community input. I want to make sure we're designing for real needs, not assumptions. That's perfect, William said. And Evan, don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. You belong at that table. Your perspective is invaluable. It was the second time that day someone had told him he belonged, and this time Evan let himself believe it a little more. The rest of the week unfolded in a pattern that started to feel almost like routine. Evan drove to Boston early Monday morning, spent the day at Wells and Avery reviewing drawings and preparing for the focus groups, then drove home Monday night to be with Lila. Tuesday was their sacred mac and cheese night, inviolable. Wednesday morning, he drove back to Boston with an overnight bag, stayed at the corporate apartment Harper had arranged, and ran his first focus group that afternoon in Hartford. The focus group was revelatory. 15 members of the deaf and hard of hearing community gathered in a conference room at the Hartford Center, and Evan listened to their experiences, their frustrations, their hopes with the intensity of someone whose daughter's future depended on getting this right. Every building assumes we're broken hearing people, one woman signed, her hands sharp with frustration. They add accommodations like Band-Aids. We don't need Band-Aids. We need buildings designed for how we actually exist in the world. Sightlines matter more than acoustics, a man in his 30s signed. I need to see everyone in a room, not just the person speaking at the front. Current auditorium designs make that impossible. Lighting, signed a teenager who reminded Evan painfully of Lila. Everything is about mood lighting, romantic shadows. But I need to see hands clearly. I need consistent, bright, shadowless light. Why is that so hard? Evan took notes furiously, his mind already spinning with solutions. After the focus group ended, several participants stayed to talk with him individually, sharing stories that broke his heart and fired his determination in equal measure. Thursday's focus group brought different perspectives: parents of deaf children, educators, service providers. Friday's group included elderly deaf community members, their experiences spanning decades of being invisible in a hearing world. By Friday afternoon, when Evan sat down with Harper to review his findings, he had pages of notes, dozens of insights, and a crystal-clear understanding of what needed to change. The building needs to assume visual communication as primary, Evan explained, spreading his sketches across Harper's conference table. Not accommodate it, not add it as an afterthought, but design for it from the foundation up. Harper leaned over the drawings, her expression intent. Show me what that looks like. Curved walls instead of straight ones, Evan said, pointing to his revised floor plans. So people can see across spaces instead of being blocked by corners. Open circulation patterns that allow visual contact. Lighting from multiple sources to eliminate shadows. Materials and colors that enhance rather than interfere with visual clarity. The auditorium, Harper said, focusing on one particular drawing. You've completely reimagined it. No pillars, Evan confirmed. We use a different structural system. Tension cables from the ceiling, load-bearing walls that curve rather than interrupt. Everyone in the audience has clear sight lines to the stage and to each other. The lighting is designed for visibility first, aesthetics second. The colors are chosen to provide contrast without causing eye strain. Harper was quiet for a long moment, studying the drawings. Then she looked up at Evan with something like wonder in her expression. This isn't just accessible, she said softly. This is beautiful. This is architecture that celebrates difference rather than compensating for it. That's exactly what the community asked for, Evan said. They don't want to be accommodated. They want to be centered. Can we build this? Harper asked. Structurally, financially, is this actually feasible? I don't know yet, Evan admitted. I need David's input on the structural systems, Sarah's expertise on the lighting, Michael's experience on spatial planning, but I think so. I think if we approach it right, this might actually be more elegant and potentially less expensive than the current design. Harper stood, gathering the drawings. Let's find out. Team meeting, Monday morning. We present this to everyone and see if we can make it real. That night, driving home to Hartford for the weekend, Evan felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. He'd spent the week immersed in a world he'd only touched the edges of before. Professional architecture at the highest level, with resources and expertise he'd only dreamed of accessing. And yet somehow he hadn't felt out of place. His perspective had been valued, his insights taken seriously, his experience recognized as legitimate expertise. Maybe Harper was right. Maybe he did belong at that table. Lila was waiting at the apartment window when he pulled into the parking lot, and she ran out to meet him before he'd even fully parked, her face bright with excitement. Dad, you're home! Tell me everything! They spent the weekend together, Evan sharing carefully edited stories about his week, while Lila told him about school, about her friends, about the building she was designing out of cardboard boxes in her room. Want to see it? She signed eagerly on Saturday afternoon. Evan followed her to her room, where an elaborate structure covered most of her floor, cardboard boxes connected with duct tape, carefully cut windows, doors that actually opened on hinges she'd somehow engineered. It's a community center, Lila signed proudly. For everyone. See? The doors are extra wide so wheelchairs can fit. And look. She pointed to small drawings she'd taped to the walls. Visual signs for people like me. Pictures and words together so everyone can understand. Evan knelt beside his daughter's creation, his throat tight with emotion. She was 8 years old and already designing for inclusion, already thinking about how to make spaces that welcomed everyone. It's perfect, he signed. You're going to be an amazing architect someday. Like you, Lila signed simply, and Evan pulled her into a hug to hide the tears threatening to spill. Sunday night, after Lila was asleep, Evan sat at his desk and refined his drawings for Monday's presentation. He worked until past midnight, fueled by coffee and determination, making sure every detail was clear, every solution thoughtfully considered. His phone buzzed around 11:30 with a text from Harper. "Ready for tomorrow?" Evan typed back, "As ready as I'll ever be. Thank you again for this opportunity." "Thank you," Harper responded immediately. "You're changing this project in ways I didn't even know it needed. Sleep well. See you Monday." Evan stared at her message for a long moment, letting himself absorb the validation, the recognition that what he was doing mattered. Then he closed his laptop, checked on Lila one more time, and went to bed, dreaming of buildings that welcomed everyone, spaces designed with love, and the extraordinary power of simply choosing to see. Monday would bring new challenges, new skepticism to overcome, new problems to solve. But for tonight, Evan Carter let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And maybe the world was becoming the kind of place where his daughter, and all the Lilas yet to come, would finally, truly be seen. Monday morning's team meeting had the electric tension of a moment that could go either way, triumph or disaster, with very little room for anything in between. Evan arrived at the office at 7:30, wanting time to set up his presentation before anyone else appeared. But Harper was already there, 2 cups of coffee on the conference table and an expression that managed to be both encouraging and nervous. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, handing him one of the cups. "Not much," Evan admitted, setting down his portfolio and the carefully organized presentation boards he'd spent Sunday night perfecting. "You?" "I kept thinking about Robert's face when we tell him we're essentially starting over," Harper said with a rueful smile. "He's going to fight this." "Should I be worried?" "Probably," Harper said honestly, "but I'm the CEO, and ultimately this is my call. I just need you to present your vision clearly enough that the team understands why we're doing this. Make them believe it's not just possible but necessary." "No pressure," Evan said, trying for humor despite the anxiety coiling in his stomach. "You stopped to help my mother when you had every reason to keep walking," Harper said quietly. "You can handle this." The team started arriving at 8:45. Michael with his ever-present laptop, Sarah carrying a portfolio of lighting samples, David with his engineering calculations, Rachel from interiors looking curious and slightly apprehensive. Robert arrived last, precisely at 9 o'clock, his expression already skeptical before he'd even seen what Evan had prepared. When everyone was settled, Harper stood at the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here. I know we're gathered earlier than usual, but what Evan has to show us requires proper time and attention. Over the past week, he's conducted 3 focus groups with members of the Hartford deaf and hard of hearing community, gathering input that's going to fundamentally reshape how we approach this project." She gestured to Evan. "The floor is yours." Evan stood, his mouth dry despite the coffee, and faced a room full of architects and designers, whose combined experience probably totaled 2 centuries. He thought about Lila's cardboard community center, about Margaret signing desperately in an airport terminal, about every person who'd shared their stories in the focus groups with hope that someone might finally listen. "I'm going to start with something one of the focus group participants said," Evan began, his voice steadier than he felt. "She told me, every building assumes we're broken hearing people. They add accommodations like Band-Aids. We don't need Band-Aids. We need buildings designed for how we actually exist in the world." He paused, letting the words settle. That statement crystallized everything wrong with our current design. He pulled out the first presentation board showing the existing auditorium layout. "This is what we have now. It meets ADA requirements. It includes visual alert systems. It checks every box on the accessibility checklist, and it fundamentally fails the people it's meant to serve." Michael shifted uncomfortably. Robert's expression remained neutral, but Evan could see the calculation in his eyes. "The pillars obstruct sightlines," Evan continued, pointing to the structural columns. "For a deaf audience that needs to see interpreters, performers, and each other, these aren't just inconvenient, they're barriers that make the space unusable for its primary purpose. The lighting creates shadows that interfere with sign language visibility. The acoustic design prioritizes sound for a community where many users won't benefit from it, and the spatial arrangement assumes verbal communication patterns." He pulled out his redesigned floor plan, and he heard Sarah inhale sharply. This is what happens when we design for visual communication as primary rather than secondary, Evan said. No pillars. We use a tension cable system from the ceiling that David and I will need to develop together, but preliminary engineering suggests it's feasible. Curved walls that create clear sight lines across the entire space. Lighting from multiple angles designed for visibility first, aesthetics second. Spatial arrangements that assume people need to see each other to communicate. David leaned forward, studying the structural drawings. That cable system, you're talking about significant engineering. That's not a simple change. I know, Evan said, but it's the right change. And here's what's interesting. Preliminary cost estimates suggest it might actually be comparable to the current design. We're eliminating the pillar foundations, simplifying the floor structure, and using the architectural form itself to solve structural problems rather than fighting against it. Sarah was studying the lighting plans now, her expression thoughtful. You've specified high-color rendering index fixtures throughout, multiple light sources to eliminate shadows, and maintained consistent brightness levels. That's elegant. It might even reduce our energy consumption compared to the current design. The community was clear about what they needed, Evan said. I'm just translating their lived experience into architectural solutions. Robert finally spoke, his tone measured. These are interesting ideas, Mr. Carter, but you're proposing we abandon weeks of design development work, go back to schematic design essentially, and delay the project timeline by months. The client has already approved the current design. The budget is allocated. The construction timeline is set. He looked at Harper. This isn't just a design change. It's a complete project restart. The client approved the current design because they didn't have a better option, Evan said before Harper could respond. But when I spoke with William Torres, the executive director, he told me he's been concerned about the design since he first saw it. He said it felt like it was designed for hearing people's idea of what deaf people need rather than what the community actually needs. Evan met Robert's gaze. He also said bringing me onto the team was the best news he'd had in months. The client wants this. One person's opinion, Robert started. 57 people's opinions, Evan interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. That's how many community members participated in the focus groups. 57 deaf and hard-of-hearing individuals who will actually use this building, who shared their experiences and frustrations and hopes. This isn't about my ideas or your preferences or aesthetic choices. This is about serving the community this building is meant for. The room fell silent. Harper was watching Evan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Michael and Sarah were studying the revised drawings with obvious interest. David was running calculations on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Rachel, the interior designer who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Can I see the circulation patterns in the community gathering spaces? Evan pulled out those drawings, and Rachel studied them intently. You've created visual corridors, she said slowly. Spaces where people can see each other across distances, where communication can happen naturally without forcing people into close proximity. Exactly, Evan said, grateful for her understanding. Deaf communication requires visual contact, which means spatial arrangements need to facilitate that. Our current design has a lot of small, enclosed rooms. This opens them up while maintaining acoustic separation for hard-of-hearing users who benefit from reduced background noise. It's actually brilliant, Rachel said, and Robert's jaw tightened slightly. David looked up from his calculations. The tension cable system could work. It's unusual, but structurally sound. We'd need to consult with a specialist, but preliminary numbers suggest it's feasible within budget, maybe even under budget if we account for eliminated foundation work. Robert was looking increasingly uncomfortable, like someone watching his carefully constructed arguments dissolve. Harper, can I speak with you privately? Anything you need to say can be said here, Harper replied, her tone pleasant but firm. We're a team. We make decisions together. Robert's expression suggested he disagreed, but he continued anyway. You're letting personal feelings override professional judgment. This redesign is risky, expensive, and unnecessary. We have a good design that meets all requirements. Making these changes could jeopardize the entire project. We have a technically adequate design that fails to serve its community, Harper corrected. And if we deliver that building, we'll have created something beautiful and useless. I'm not willing to do that. She looked around the table. I'm asking each of you, is this redesign worth pursuing? Michael? Michael nodded slowly. I think so. I've been uncomfortable with the auditorium design for weeks, but couldn't articulate why. Evan just showed us why. I'm on board. Sarah? The lighting approach is more thoughtful than what we had, Sarah said. I'd like to develop it further. David? The engineering is challenging but solvable, David said. And honestly, it's more interesting than what we were doing. I'm in. Rachel? Absolutely, Rachel said. This is the kind of project that could set a new standard for accessible design. I want to be part of that. Harper turned to Robert last. Robert? He was quiet for a long moment, and Evan could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, professional caution warring with the reality that his entire team had just endorsed the change. I still think this is risky, Robert said finally, but I'm outvoted, and I trust this team's judgment even when I disagree with it. If we're doing this, we do it right. That means proper timeline adjustments, clear budget oversight, and regular check-ins to make sure we're not going off the rails. Agreed, Harper said. Evan, how long do you need to develop these concepts into full schematic design? Evan thought quickly, trying to balance ambition with reality. 6 weeks for complete schematic design, another month for design development. We present to the client in early February instead of December. That's 2 months, Robert said. 2 months of delay on a project that's already pushing schedule. 2 months to get it right, Harper countered. William Torres will understand, and frankly, I'd rather delay and deliver excellence than rush and deliver mediocrity. She looked at Evan. 6 weeks. You'll work with the full team, Michael on spatial planning, Sarah on lighting, David on structural systems, Rachel on interiors. You lead on accessibility considerations, but this is collaborative. Everyone's expertise matters. Understood, Evan said, relief and excitement flooding through him in equal measure. Meeting adjourned, Harper said. Let's get to work. The team dispersed and Evan found himself surrounded by Michael, Sarah, and Rachel, all of them asking questions, making suggestions, already diving into the work. David approached more cautiously, but his questions about the structural system were detailed and genuinely curious. Robert left without speaking to Evan, and Harper caught Evan's concerned glance. Don't worry about Robert, she said quietly. He's cautious by nature, which is why he's a good partner. He keeps me from being too impulsive. But once he commits, he's all in. He'll come around. I hope so, Evan said. I don't want to create problems for you. You're not creating problems, Harper said firmly. You're solving them. Now get to work. 6 weeks isn't as long as it sounds. She wasn't wrong. The next 6 weeks unfolded in a blur of intense collaboration, late nights, and the kind of deep creative work that Evan hadn't experienced since architecture school. He fell into a rhythm, 3 days a week in Boston, staying at the corporate apartment Harper had arranged, working closely with the team. 2 days working from Hartford, closer to Lila, maintaining their Tuesday night mac and cheese tradition that became even more sacred as his work intensified. The apartment in Boston's North End was modest but comfortable, and Evan learned its quirks quickly. The radiator that clanked at odd hours, the neighbor who practiced violin at 6 a.m., the small Italian bakery 2 blocks away that sold the best focaccia Evan had ever tasted. He'd eat breakfast there some mornings, sketching on napkins while surrounded by rapid Italian and the smell of fresh bread. The work itself was consuming in the best way. Michael proved to be a generous collaborator, open to Evan's ideas while contributing expertise that turned rough concepts into buildable solutions. Sarah's lighting designs evolved into something extraordinary, fixtures that provided the consistent, shadow-free illumination the deaf community needed while creating an atmosphere that felt warm and welcoming rather than clinical. David's engineering calculations transformed Evan's vision of a pillar-free auditorium into structural reality. The tension cable system, elegant and efficient. Rachel became an unexpected ally, her interior design concepts embracing the visual communication philosophy that underlay the entire project. She selected materials and colors that enhanced rather than interfered with sightlines, created furniture arrangements that assumed visual rather than verbal conversation patterns, and designed wayfinding systems that used clear symbols alongside text. Even Robert began to warm to the project. 2 weeks in, he stopped by Evan's office with a set of construction cost estimates. "The numbers are working," Robert said, setting the documents on Evan's desk. "You were right about the structural changes potentially saving money. We're actually trending slightly under budget." "That's good news," Evan said carefully, unsure if Robert was offering an olive branch or just reporting facts. "It is," Robert agreed. He hesitated, then continued. "I owe you an apology. I was skeptical of Harper bringing you onto the team. I thought it was sentiment overriding judgment, but what you're creating here," he gestured at the drawings covering Evan's walls. "This is exceptional work. You're making us better." The admission clearly cost him something, and Evan appreciated the honesty. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." "Don't let it go to your head," Robert said with a slight smile. "You still have 4 weeks to deliver full schematic design, and the hard part is just beginning." But even the hard part felt manageable when the work mattered this much. Evan found himself energized rather than exhausted by the long hours, excited to tackle each new challenge. The building was becoming something special, not just accessible, but beautiful, not accommodating difference, but celebrating it. His relationship with Harper evolved during those weeks too, shifting from professional collaboration to something deeper, though Evan was careful not to examine it too closely. They worked late together often, ordering takeout to the office and reviewing drawings over Thai food or pizza. Harper would sign while they talked, seamlessly shifting between ASL and speech, and Evan found himself doing the same, their communication patterns adapting to each other naturally. She told him about growing up with Margaret, about learning to navigate between deaf and hearing worlds, about the specific loneliness of being a bridge between two communities without fully belonging to either. "I'm deaf enough that the hearing world sometimes excludes me," Harper signed one night over pad thai, 3 weeks into the project. "But I'm hearing enough that the deaf community sometimes sees me as an outsider. You exist in both worlds, but never quite fit perfectly in either." "Lila's going to face that," Evan signed back, the worry he always carried surfacing. "She's being raised in both communities, learning both languages. I want her to feel whole, not fragmented." "She will," Harper signed with certainty. "Because she has you. Because you're teaching her that she doesn't have to choose, that she can be fully herself in all her complexity." Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly professional, and Evan felt something shift in the air between them. But then Harper's phone buzzed with an email alert, the moment broke, and they returned to discussing sightline calculations for the community gathering spaces. Margaret visited the office regularly, officially to help with administrative tasks, but really to check on the project's progress. She'd review drawings with the careful attention of someone who understood intimately what would work and what wouldn't, offering insights that repeatedly proved invaluable. "This corner," she signed to Evan one afternoon, pointing to a transition space between the auditorium and the lobby. "People will gather here before and after events. They need to see both directions, back into the auditorium and forward to the exit. Right now, the sightlines are blocked." Evan studied the drawing and realized she was absolutely right. "How do we fix it?" Margaret thought for a moment, then sketched directly on the drawing, a curved wall instead of a straight one, a shift in the door placement, a small but significant change that opened up the visual field. "Like this," she signed. "Simple, but it matters." Evan incorporated her suggestion, and when Michael saw the revision, he immediately recognized its value. "Your unofficial consultant is better at this than some of our official ones," he told Evan with a grin. "She's been navigating these spaces her entire life," Evan said. "She's the real expert." As the weeks progressed, Evan found himself thinking more often about his future, about what came after this project. The consulting work was temporary. Harper had made that clear, but she'd also mentioned that if things went well, there might be opportunities for permanent positions. Evan tried not to hope too hard, tried not to let himself imagine a future where he worked at Wells and Avery full-time, where he designed meaningful projects alongside people who valued his perspective, where financial stability wasn't a constant source of anxiety. But the hope crept in anyway, especially during the moments when Harper would review his work with obvious pride, or when Margaret would squeeze his shoulder and sign her approval, or when Robert would grudgingly admit that Evan's solutions were better than the original designs. Lila was doing well despite Evan's increased travel, largely thanks to Mrs. Chen's patient support and the fact that Evan protected their Tuesday nights fiercely. No matter what was happening with the project, no matter what deadlines loomed, Tuesday evenings belonged to Lila. They'd make mac and cheese together. She'd tell him about school, and he'd show her drawings from the community center project. "When it's done, can we go see it?" Lila signed one Tuesday night in late December, studying a rendering of the completed building. "Absolutely," Evan signed back. "I want you to see what we're creating. It's going to be a place where people like you are welcomed, where the building itself speaks your language." "That's really cool, Dad," Lila signed, and the simple pride in her expression made every long hour worth it. By early January, with 1 week left before the deadline, the design was coming together beautifully. The team worked with focused intensity, everyone understanding that they were creating something exceptional. The auditorium with its revolutionary cable system and perfect sight lines, the community spaces with their visual corridors, the lighting that enhanced rather than interfered with communication, every element served the community thoughtfully. Harper scheduled the client presentation for January 12th, giving them a few days buffer to prepare after completing the schematic design. William Torres from the Hartford Center had assembled a committee of deaf and hard-of-hearing community leaders to review the design, and Evan felt the weight of their judgment like a physical thing. "What if they hate it?" he asked Harper the night before the presentation as they reviewed the final boards one last time. "They won't," Harper said with certainty. "You designed it with them, for them. You listened to what they needed and created solutions that honored their input. That's the opposite of what usually happens." "But what if we miss something? What if there's some obvious flaw that we're too close to see?" Harper set down the drawing she was holding and turned to face Evan fully. "We've done good work, really good work. And even if there are refinements needed, which there probably are because no design is perfect, we've created a foundation that actually serves this community. That's what matters." She was standing close enough that Evan could smell her perfume, something subtle and woodsy. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Close enough that the air between them felt charged with possibility. "Harper," he started, not entirely sure what he was going to say. His phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the moment. It was Mrs. Chen. "Lila has a fever. Not serious, but wanted you to know." The worry that never fully left him surged to the surface. "I should call," he said apologetically. "Of course," Harper said, stepping back, and Evan wondered if he'd imagined the disappointment that flickered across her face. He stepped into the hallway and called Mrs. Chen, who assured him Lila's fever was low grade, probably just a cold, nothing to panic about. But Evan's mind was already calculating. Could he leave early tomorrow, skip the morning prep session, be home by afternoon to take care of his daughter? When he returned to Harper's office, she was carefully organizing the presentation boards, her expression professionally neutral again. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Lila's got a fever. Mrs. Chen says it's minor, but you want to be there," Harper finished. "Go. We've got the prep covered. The presentation isn't until 2 p.m. tomorrow anyway. Drive home tonight, take care of your daughter, come straight to Hartford Center tomorrow by 1:30. We'll meet you there." "Are you sure?" "Evan, your daughter needs you. That's always the priority. We're fine here." He gathered his things quickly, grateful for her understanding, but frustrated by the constant pull between his professional dreams and his parental responsibilities. It was nearly 9 p.m. by the time he reached Hartford, stopping first at a pharmacy for children's fever medication before heading home. Lila was curled on Mrs. Chen's couch, looking small and miserable, her face flushed with fever. When she saw Evan, she immediately started signing, "I'm sorry. I know you have important work." "Hey, stop that," Evan signed, pulling her into a careful hug. "You're the most important work. Always." He got her home, administered medication, and stayed beside her bed until she fell into restless sleep. Then he sat at his desk and pulled out the presentation materials one more time, reviewing them by lamplight while listening to his daughter's breathing through the open door. This was his life, toggling constantly between architect and father, professional and parent, individual dreams and family responsibilities. And tomorrow, somehow, he needed to deliver the presentation of his career while making sure his sick daughter was cared for. Around midnight, his phone lit up with a text from Harper. How's Lila? Fever's down, she's sleeping. I'll be there tomorrow. I know you will. And Evan, we're going to be great tomorrow. Trust the work we've done. He wanted to text back something about how much her faith meant to him, about how these past 6 weeks had changed everything, about the feelings that had been growing steadily despite his attempts to ignore them. But it was late. His daughter was sick, and tomorrow was too important to complicate with emotions he wasn't sure Harper shared. So he just typed, "Thank you. See you tomorrow," and tried not to think too hard about the fact that somewhere during the past 6 weeks of late nights and collaborative dinners and shared understanding, he'd started falling for Harper Wells. The next morning arrived with weak winter sunlight and Lila's fever down to normal. Evan made her breakfast, got her settled with movies and books, and called Mrs. Chen to see if she could check on Lila throughout the day. "Of course," Mrs. Chen said. "You go do your presentation. Lila and I will be fine. She can come over here if she wants company." Evan kissed Lila's forehead, signed his love, and drove to Hartford Center with his heart hammering against his ribs. The presentation materials were loaded in his car. His clothes were carefully chosen to look professional without trying too hard, and his mind was running through the presentation sequence for the 100th time. He arrived at 1:15 to find the Wells and Avery team already setting up in the Hartford Center's largest conference room. Harper looked up when he entered, and her face brightened with relief and something else that made Evan's pulse quicken. "You made it. How's Lila?" "Better. Fever's gone. Mrs. Chen's checking on her." "Good." Harper squeezed his arm briefly, a gesture of support that felt charged with unspoken meaning. "Ready to show them what we've created?" Evan looked at the presentation boards arrayed around the room. 6 weeks of intensive work, community input translated into architectural solutions, a building design not just for accessibility but for belonging. He thought about Margaret signing in an airport terminal, about Lila's cardboard community center, about 57 people who'd shared their stories in focus groups hoping someone would listen. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." The committee began arriving at 1:30. William Torres and a dozen community leaders, all deaf or hard of hearing, all intimately familiar with the ways buildings typically failed them. They settled around the conference table with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical, and Evan felt the weight of their collective experience. Harper opened the presentation with interpreters present for those who preferred voice-to-sign interpretation, though most of the committee signed fluently. She introduced the team, explained the redesign process, and then turned the presentation over to Evan. 6 weeks ago, Evan began, signing as he spoke, Harper asked me to join this project because of a chance encounter in an airport. I helped her mother, Margaret Wells, find her gate after she'd been ignored by dozens of people. I stopped because I have a deaf daughter, and I understood what it feels like to be invisible. He saw several committee members nod in recognition. Margaret told me later that I'd seen her as a person first, not as a deaf person. And that's what we've tried to do with this building, design it for real people with real needs, not for theoretical users who exist only in accessibility guidelines. Evan walked them through the design systematically, explaining each choice and the community input that had shaped it. The auditorium with no pillars, creating perfect sight lines, the lighting designed for visual communication, the spatial arrangements that assume signing rather than speech, the wayfinding systems that use symbols and text together. Every detail considered, every choice intentional. The committee members asked questions, made suggestions, pushed back on certain elements. But Evan could see their engagement growing, their initial skepticism transforming into genuine interest, and then something that looked like excitement. When he finished the presentation, there was a long moment of silence. Then William Torres began to sign, and his hands moved with emotion. "In 30 years of working in this community," William signed, "I've never seen a design that understands us this well. This isn't a building with accommodations added. This is a building designed from the ground up for visual communication, for deaf culture, for our way of being in the world." He looked directly at Evan. "This is what we've been waiting for." Around the table, other committee members were nodding, signing their agreement. One woman had tears in her eyes as she signed. Finally someone sees us." Harper caught Evan's gaze across the room, and the pride in her expression was unmistakable. Margaret, who'd come to observe, was smiling broadly, signing applause. The committee voted unanimously to approve the schematic design and move forward with design development. After the formal meeting ended, committee members crowded around Evan, asking questions, sharing stories, thanking him for creating something that honored their community. William pulled Evan aside as people were leaving. "This project is going to set a new standard," he signed. "Other communities are going to see this and demand the same level of thoughtfulness. You're changing the conversation about accessible design." "I just listened," Evan signed back. "The community told me what they needed. I just translated it into architecture." "That's what makes you perfect for this work," William signed. "You know how to listen." The drive back to Boston that evening felt different somehow, lighter, celebratory. Harper had insisted on Evan riding with her and Margaret, claiming they needed to debrief the presentation, but mostly they spent the drive laughing and replaying the committee's reactions. "Did you see Patricia's face when they started applauding?" Harper said, grinning. "She was crying." "Your lighting design made Sarah cry too," Evan said. "She told me after the meeting that she'd never felt so proud of her work." Margaret, sitting in the back seat, signed from between the front seats, "I'm proud of both of you. You made something beautiful together." The way she signed "together" felt pointed, and Evan saw Harper's cheeks color slightly. Back at the office, the team gathered for an impromptu celebration, champagne that someone pulled from somewhere, takeout from everyone's favorite restaurants, and the giddy relief of people who'd worked intensely toward a goal and achieved it. Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To Evan Carter, who proved me spectacularly wrong and made us all better architects in the process." "To the team," Evan countered. "I had ideas, but you all made them real." "To partnership," Harper said, and her eyes were on Evan when she said it. "To the magic that happens when the right people come together at the right time." They drank, and Michael launched into an enthusiastic analysis of the structural engineering that made David laugh, and Sarah pulled up photos she'd taken of the committee's reactions, and the celebration stretched into the evening. Around 9 o'clock, people started dispersing, heading home to families and lives outside the office. Evan checked his phone, a text from Mrs. Chen saying Lila was feeling much better and had beaten her at cards 3 times in a row. Relief flooded through him. He was gathering his things to leave when Harper appeared in his office doorway. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Of course." She came in and closed the door behind her, which felt significant. For a moment, she just looked at him, and Evan's heart started doing complicated things in his chest. "I wanted to say thank you," Harper finally said. "What you did today, what you've done over these past 6 weeks, it's been extraordinary. You took a good project and made it exceptional. You challenged us to think differently, to design better. And the committee's reaction—" She paused, emotion flickering across her face. "That's why we do this work. That's what it's supposed to feel like." "It's been the most meaningful work of my career," Evan said honestly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "It wasn't a chance," Harper said. "It was certainty. My mother saw who you were in that airport, and she was right." She stepped closer. "Evan, I know your consulting agreement was only through schematic design, but I'm hoping you'll stay on for design development and construction documentation. I'm hoping—" She hesitated, then continued. "I'm hoping you'll consider joining Wells and Avery permanently, as senior accessibility consultant working across all our projects." Evan's breath caught. A permanent position, financial stability, meaningful work, everything he dreamed of and stopped letting himself dream. "Harper, that's incredible. But I have Lila and Hartford, and—" "We'll make it work," Harper interrupted. "Whatever schedule you need, whatever arrangement works for your daughter. Remote work some days, flexible hours, Hartford office space if that helps. We figure it out together because you're too valuable to lose." They were standing very close now, close enough that Evan could see Harper's pulse beating at her throat, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "There's something else," Harper said quietly, and now her voice had shifted to something more personal, more vulnerable. "These past 6 weeks, working with you, it's been professional, and it's been something more than professional. And I don't know if you feel it too, but I had to say something because I can't keep pretending it's just collaboration when—" Evan kissed her. He didn't plan it, didn't think about whether it was appropriate or professional or complicated. He just closed the distance between them and kissed her. and Harper made a small sound of surprise before kissing him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harper smiled up at him. "So you feel it too," she said. "Yeah," Evan said, his voice rough. "I really do." "This is complicated," Harper said, though she made no move to step away. "You work for me, technically. There are power dynamics to consider. We need to be careful." "I know," Evan said. "But Harper, these past weeks, being around you, working with you, learning from you, it's been more than just professional for a while now." "For me too," Harper admitted. "I kept telling myself it was just admiration, just respect for your talent. But it's more than that." They stood there in Evan's small office, the celebration sounds fading from down the hallway, and Evan felt the future shifting into focus. A future that included meaningful work and financial stability, and this remarkable woman who understood him in ways he hadn't known he needed. "So what do we do?" Evan asked. "We take it slow," Harper said. "We're honest with each other and with the team. We don't hide it, but we don't make it complicated either. And," she smiled, "we see where it goes." "I'd like that," Evan said, and kissed her again because he could, because she wanted him to, because everything that had seemed impossible 6 weeks ago was suddenly, miraculously, within reach. They left the office together that night, walking out into cold January air that felt like possibility. And Evan thought about how one choice in an airport terminal had led to this moment. How stopping to help a stranger had reshaped his entire life, had brought him to Harper and meaningful work, and a future that looked nothing like the struggle he'd been grinding through. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion created the biggest changes. Sometimes choosing to see someone led to being seen yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe rewarded good hearts with more than they'd ever dared to dream. The drive home to Hartford that night took on a dreamlike quality. Evan's mind still replaying the kiss, Harper's words about a permanent position, the way everything he'd been carefully not hoping for had suddenly materialized in the space of a single evening. His phone sat in the cup holder, Harper's last text glowing on the screen. "Drive safe. We have so much to talk about tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt weighted with promise and complexity in equal measure. Evan needed to tell Lila, needed to figure out logistics, needed to understand what this shift from consultant to permanent employee would actually mean for their lives. But underneath the practical concerns ran a current of pure joy he couldn't quite contain. When he arrived home, Mrs. Chen was waiting with Lila, who'd fallen asleep on their couch. The elderly woman took one look at Evan's face and smiled knowingly. "Good news from the presentation?" she asked quietly, careful not to wake Lila. "Really good news," Evan said, and found himself telling her everything. The committee's enthusiastic approval, the permanent job offer, even the complicated, wonderful thing with Harper, though he kept that part vague. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd known him long enough to understand what this meant. "You deserve this, Evan. You've worked so hard for so long. And Lila," she glanced at the sleeping child. "She deserves to see her father happy and fulfilled, not just surviving." "I'm worried about how much I'll be traveling," Evan admitted, "about disrupting her routine, about asking too much of you." "We'll figure it out," Mrs. Chen said firmly, echoing Harper's words from earlier. "That's what families do. And Evan, you've spent 8 years making sure Lila has everything she needs. Maybe it's time to let yourself have what you need, too." He carried Lila home, tucked her into bed, and sat at his desk staring at his laptop without opening it. His old life, the struggle, the constant financial anxiety, the small projects that paid bills but didn't feed his soul, felt like it was already receding into the past. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and also terrifying in its uncertainty. Evan pulled up his bank account, looking at the balance that had been causing him stress for months. The consulting fees from Wells and Avery had already helped, and a permanent salary would mean actual financial stability for the first time since Sarah left. It would mean being able to fix the car without panic, to buy Lila the hearing aids upgrade her audiologist recommended, to maybe even save for her college fund instead of just hoping he'd figure it out when the time came. But it also meant change, more time in Boston, less predictable schedules, navigating a relationship with his boss that was both thrilling and professionally complicated. It meant Lila adjusting to a new normal, Mrs. Chen taking on more responsibility, and Evan learning to balance being present for his daughter while pursuing work that mattered. He was still awake, thinking through logistics, when his phone buzzed with a video message from Harper. She was signing in the video, sitting in what looked like her home office, and Evan's heart did that complicated thing again just seeing her face. "I couldn't sleep," Harper signed. "Keep thinking about everything that happened today. The presentation, the committee's reaction, us." She paused, her expression softening. "I want you to know that the job offer stands regardless of what happens with the personal stuff. If you need to keep things professional, if the relationship piece is too complicated with Lila and logistics, I understand. The work comes first. You come first. I just needed to say that." Evan hit record on his own video response, signing back. "I couldn't sleep either. And Harper, I want both. The job and the relationship and whatever complications come with it, we'll figure it out together." He sent the message and watched the 3 dots appear as Harper typed. Then another video came through. She was smiling now, that full, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. "Together. I like the sound of that. Sleep well, Evan Carter. Tomorrow we start planning the rest of design development. And maybe dinner sometime, if you're free." "I'm free," he signed back, grinning at his phone like a teenager. "Good night, Harper." Morning arrived with Lila bouncing on his bed at 7 a.m., fully recovered from her fever and full of energy. "Dad, you're still sleeping. It's late. What happened at the presentation? Did they like it? Tell me everything." Evan sat up, rubbing his eyes, and pulled Lila down beside him. "They loved it," he signed. "The committee approved everything. We're moving forward with the design." "I knew they would," Lila signed enthusiastically. "Your design was perfect. When can we see it?" "Not for a while. We have to finish all the drawings and then actually build it. But there's something else I need to talk to you about." Evan took a breath, suddenly nervous. "Harper offered me a permanent job at Wells & Avery. Not just consulting, but actually working there full-time." Lila's hands stilled, processing. "In Boston?" "Some of the time, yes. But I'd still work from home, too, and we'd figure out a schedule that works for us. Mrs. Chen said she'd help more, and Lila—" He made sure she was looking at him. "This would never change how important you are. You're still the most important thing in my life. Always." "But it's what you want?" Lila signed. "The job?" "Yes," Evan signed honestly. "It's work that matters, with people who value what I do. It's designing buildings that help communities like yours. It's the opportunity I never thought I'd have." Lila was quiet for a moment, and Evan could see her thinking hard, her face serious in that way 8-year-olds had when wrestling with big concepts. "Then you should do it," she finally signed. "You're always telling me that I can do anything, that being deaf doesn't limit me. So you can do anything too. And Dad—" She looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. "You're always happy when you come home from Boston now. You weren't happy before, not really. I want you to be happy." Evan pulled her into a hug, his throat tight. How had he gotten so lucky with this kid? "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lila signed matter-of-factly when he released her. "You just noticed?" They made pancakes for breakfast, one of Lila's favorite foods after mac and cheese, and Evan found himself telling her more about the project, about the focus groups, about designing a building where people who signed would feel welcomed and seen. "Like my cardboard building," Lila signed excitedly. "Except real and big, and people can actually use it." "Exactly like that," Evan agreed. "You're going to be an amazing architect someday, sweetheart. You already understand what matters, that buildings should work for everyone." "Will you teach me," Lila signed, "about architecture and design and making buildings that include people?" "Every day," Evan promised. "We'll learn together." The rest of the week unfolded in a flurry of activity. Evan officially accepted the permanent position at Wells & Avery, negotiating a schedule that kept him home Tuesdays and Fridays, working from Hartford Mondays while coming into Boston Wednesdays and Thursdays. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable, and Harper had been true to her word about flexibility. "Family comes first," she'd said when they finalized the arrangement. "The work will still be here. Lila needs her dad present, not just physically there, but actually engaged. We make this work for both of you, or we don't do it at all." The design development phase of the Hartford Community Center project stretched through winter and into early spring. Evan worked closely with the entire team, refining every detail, solving problems as they emerged, maintaining constant communication with the community members who'd participated in the focus groups. William Torres arranged monthly check-ins where committee members could review progress and provide feedback, ensuring the design stayed true to the community's needs, even as it evolved. Robert continued to surprise Evan with his transformation from skeptic to advocate. At a design review meeting in March, when a cost-cutting measure threatened to compromise the lighting design, Robert was the one who argued most forcefully for maintaining Sarah's specifications. "We don't cut corners on the elements that matter," Robert said firmly. "The lighting is fundamental to how this building serves its community. We find savings elsewhere." They found savings elsewhere. David's structural engineering brilliance led to efficiencies that freed up budget. Rachel's interior material selections provided the visual clarity the space needed while actually coming in under original estimates. Michael's spatial planning created more usable square footage than the initial design, adding value without adding cost. The project worked because everyone was committed to making it work, to creating something that honored the community it would serve. Evan had never experienced collaboration like this, where ego took a backseat to purpose, where everyone's expertise was valued and integrated seamlessly. His relationship with Harper developed slowly, carefully, with the kind of thoughtful intention that came from two people who'd both learned the hard way that rushing led to mistakes. They went on actual dates, dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End where Harper taught Evan how to properly twirl spaghetti, a museum visit where they argued good-naturedly about architectural styles, a concert where an interpreter signed the lyrics and Harper held Evan's hand in the darkness. They kept it professional at work, or tried to. But there were small tells that the team picked up on: the way Harper's face brightened when Evan entered a room, the way Evan's presentation skills improved dramatically when Harper was watching, the inside jokes and shared glances that suggested intimacy beyond collaboration. Margaret knew, of course. She'd known before either of them did, she claimed with a self-satisfied smile. "I saw it that first day," she signed to Evan during one of her office visits, "the way you two looked at each other. I told Harper she was going to fall for you." "What did she say?" Evan asked, curious. "She said I was being ridiculous and romantic," Margaret signed, her eyes twinkling. "But she was smiling when she said it. She wanted to fall for you, even if she didn't know it yet." Lila met Harper for the first time in April when Harper came to Hartford for a site visit, and Evan invited her to dinner at their apartment. He'd been nervous about the meeting, worried about how his daughter would react to this new presence in his life. But Lila handled it with the straightforward curiosity of children. "You're my dad's boss," Lila signed when Harper arrived, studying her carefully. "I am," Harper signed back, kneeling to be at Lila's eye level. "But more importantly, I'm your dad's friend, and I hope maybe we can be friends too." "Can you sign?" Lila signed, testing her. "Fluently," Harper signed. "My mom is deaf. She taught me to sign before I learned to speak." Lila's eyes widened. "Really? Is she nice?" "She's the best person I know," Harper signed. "She'd love to meet you sometime, if that's okay." "Okay," Lila agreed. Then with the directness of 8-year-olds, "Are you dating my dad?" Harper glanced at Evan, a question in her eyes, and he nodded slightly. They'd discussed this, agreed to be honest with Lila rather than pretending their relationship was purely professional. "Yes," Harper signed to Lila. "Is that okay with you?" Lila considered this seriously. "He's been really happy lately, happier than before. So I think it's good." She paused, then added, "But if you make him sad, I'll be very upset with you." Harper's smile was soft and genuine. "That's fair. I promise I'll try my best not to make him sad. And Lila, your dad talks about you all the time. You're clearly the most important person in his world. I'm not trying to change that." "Good," Lila signed, apparently satisfied. "Do you like mac and cheese? We're having mac and cheese for dinner." "I love mac and cheese," Harper signed, and just like that, they were friends. Dinner was easier than Evan had dared hope. Harper asked Lila about school, about her friends, about her cardboard architecture projects. She admired the elaborate structure currently occupying most of Lila's bedroom floor, and offered suggestions that Lila eagerly incorporated. She signed naturally, including Lila in every conversation, never talking about her or around her the way hearing people sometimes did. After dinner, while Evan was cleaning dishes, he watched through the kitchen doorway as Harper and Lila sat on the floor together, collaborating on reinforcing a cardboard wall that kept collapsing. They were signing animatedly, laughing, completely absorbed in the problem-solving. Harper said something that made Lila giggle, and Evan felt something tight in his chest release. This could work. This complicated, beautiful thing they were building. It could actually work. When Harper left that night, she kissed Evan goodnight on the doorstep, then signed where Lila could see from the window. "Your daughter is wonderful. Thank you for sharing her with me." "Thank you for seeing her," Evan signed back. "Really seeing her, not just being nice because you're dating her dad." "Impossible not to see her," Harper signed. "She's remarkable, like her father." May brought warming weather and the final stages of construction documentation for the Hartford Community Center. The drawings were complete, the specifications written, every detail documented with the precision required for contractors to actually build what they'd designed. The project went out for bid, and Evan held his breath while contractors reviewed the plans and submitted their proposals. The bids came in surprisingly competitive. The innovative structural system that had seemed risky in January proved efficient enough that multiple contractors bid confidently on the project. The lighting design that had seemed expensive proved cost-effective when viewed holistically. Every risk they'd taken, every unconventional choice, was validated by contractors who saw the plans and understood they were both buildable and beautiful. Construction was scheduled to begin in June, with completion targeted for fall of the following year. It seemed impossibly far away, and also too close, like time was both crawling and flying simultaneously. In early June, Evan drove Lila to the construction site on a Saturday morning. The groundbreaking ceremony had happened the week before, but this was their first chance to visit together. The site was still mostly empty land, stakes marking where walls would go, orange construction fencing marking boundaries. But standing there, Evan could see the building in his mind, the curved walls, the open gathering spaces, the auditorium with its revolutionary sightlines. "This is where the main entrance will be," Evan signed to Lila, walking her through the site. "And over here, the Children's Activity Center. You remember that design you made for the kids' play space? We incorporated elements from it." Lila's eyes went wide. "My design? Really? Really?" Evan confirmed. "The committee loved it. They said a child's perspective on what makes a welcoming space was exactly what we needed." They walked the site together, Evan describing what would rise from this empty ground, and Lila asked 1,000 questions about foundation systems and structural loads and whether the playground would have swings. It was the kind of perfect mundane moment that Evan knew he'd remember forever. His daughter, his work, his future all coming together in this space that would serve communities for generations. Harper arrived about 20 minutes into their site visit, having promised to meet them there. With her was Margaret, who Lila had met twice now and adored completely. "The famous architect," Margaret signed enthusiastically when she saw Lila, pulling her into a hug. "Harper told me you helped design the children's space." "I made it out of cardboard," Lila signed, a little shy. "Dad made it real." "That's what good architects do," Margaret signed. "They take ideas and make them real. You're already a good architect." The four of them walked the site together, 2 generations of architects and the women who'd shaped their understanding of what design should be. Margaret told stories about navigating inaccessible buildings throughout her life, and Lila listened with the intense focus of someone learning important truths. "When I was your age," Margaret signed to Lila, "most buildings didn't even try to include deaf people. We were expected to just manage, to fit ourselves into spaces designed for hearing people. But you're growing up in a world where people like your dad and Harper are designing buildings that work for everyone. That's progress." "But it's not done yet," Lila signed back, surprisingly insightful. "Dad says there are still lots of buildings that don't work for deaf people." "You're right," Margaret signed, "which is why we need architects like you and your dad to keep designing better buildings. The work is never finished." They left the site and went to lunch together. The four of them crowded into a booth at a local diner where the waitress knew enough sign language to take their order directly from Margaret and Lila without asking Evan or Harper to interpret. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Another sign that the world was slowly, incrementally, becoming more inclusive. Over burgers and fries, Harper's phone buzzed with an email that made her expression shift to excitement. She read it quickly, then looked up at Evan with barely contained energy. "That was the mayor's office," she said, signing along. "They saw the renderings for Hartford Community Center and want to meet about a potential project, redesigning City Hall to be fully accessible. They specifically asked if you'd be involved." Evan felt that now familiar surge of possibility mixed with disbelief. "They asked for me specifically." "You're making a name for yourself," Harper said, her pride evident. "Word is spreading about the work you're doing. This is just the beginning, Evan." Margaret was beaming. "I told you," she signed. "Good hearts get rewarded. Sometimes it takes time, but it happens." Lila was watching all of this with interest, her young mind clearly working through implications. "Dad, does this mean more buildings?" "Maybe," Evan signed. "If we do the City Hall project well, other cities might want similar work. We could help make lots of buildings more accessible." "Good," Lila signed decisively. "That's important work. You should do it." The summer passed in a blur of activity. Construction on the Hartford Community Center progressed steadily, and Evan made regular site visits to ensure the contractors understood the nuances of the design. The City Hall project moved forward, expanding Evan's role at Wells and Avery from consultant to full team member with multiple projects under his oversight. His relationship with Harper deepened with the easy comfort of people who fit together naturally. She'd stay over sometimes at his Hartford apartment, and they'd make breakfast together while Lila did homework at the kitchen table, the three of them developing routines that felt remarkably like family. Other times, Evan would stay at Harper's Boston condo, the two of them working late into the night on different projects, occasionally looking up to share ideas or simply exist in companionable silence. They made it official at the firm in August, announcing their relationship to avoid any perception of secrecy. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The team had suspected for months anyway, and most people seemed to think it made sense that two people who collaborated so well professionally would find connection personally too. Robert pulled Evan aside after the announcement with a wry smile. "I should have seen this coming, the way you two worked together." He shook his head. "Just don't let it compromise the work. That's all I ask." "It won't," Evan promised. "The work is too important." "I know," Robert said. "That's why I'm not worried." Fall arrived with crisp air and the Hartford Community Center's structure beginning to rise from the ground. The foundation was complete, the framing underway, and Evan could finally see in physical form what had existed only in drawings for so long. He brought Lila to the site regularly, letting her watch the building take shape, explaining how the pieces fit together. Lila had started 4th grade, still at the same school, still friends with Maya, but with new confidence that Evan attributed partly to watching her father pursue meaningful work and partly to her own growing maturity. She was talking more about becoming an architect, asking detailed questions about Evan's projects, sketching her own designs with increasing sophistication. "She's going to be better than both of us," Harper said one evening, watching Lila work on a school assignment about accessible playgrounds. "She has the technical understanding and the lived experience. That's a powerful combination." "She has good role models," Evan said, squeezing Harper's hand. November brought the first anniversary of that Tuesday afternoon in the airport. 1 year since Evan had stopped to help Margaret, since everything had changed. Harper suggested they mark the occasion with dinner, the four of them together at a nice restaurant in Hartford. They gathered at the same restaurant where Evan and Harper had argued about spaghetti twirling 6 months earlier, and the conversation flowed easily, comfortably. Margaret told stories about Harper's childhood, making her daughter groan with mock embarrassment. Lila told elaborate tales about her classmates' various dramas, signing with theatrical flair that made everyone laugh. Harper and Evan traded glances across the table, that familiar warmth of shared understanding passing between them. After dinner, walking back to their cars in the cool November evening, Margaret pulled Evan aside while Harper and Lila walked ahead, deep in conversation about some architectural principle. "I wanted to thank you," Margaret signed, "not just for helping me that day at the airport, though that matters, but for everything that came after, for designing buildings that see my community, for making my daughter happy, for being exactly the person I thought you were when you stopped." I should be thanking you," Evan signed back. You changed my entire life. If you hadn't reached out to Harper—" "The universe puts people where they need to be," Margaret interrupted. "I just helped facilitate what was meant to happen. You did the hard work, the designing, the learning, the growing. You earned everything you have now." "I don't know about that," Evan signed, feeling suddenly emotional. "I just tried to do the right thing." "Exactly," Margaret signed, her hands emphatic. "That's what makes you special, Evan. You keep choosing to do the right thing, even when it's harder, even when it costs you something. That's character. That's why good things happened." The Hartford Community Center opened on a brilliant October Saturday, almost 2 years after that chance encounter in Logan Airport. The building rose from its site like a statement of intent, clean lines and generous windows, the curved walls creating flowing spaces visible even from outside. Evan stood with Harper and Lila and Margaret at the dedication ceremony, watching as hundreds of community members flooded into the space they'd all helped create. William Torres gave a speech about the years of advocacy that had led to this moment, about the community leaders who'd fought for funding, about the architects who'd listened and learned and designed something truly extraordinary. When he introduced Evan, asking him to say a few words, Evan felt the full weight of what they'd accomplished. He stepped to the podium with an interpreter beside him, signing as he spoke so the entire audience could understand. 2 years ago, Evan began, I was running through an airport trying to catch a flight home to my daughter. I was stressed, exhausted, focused only on my own problems. And then I saw an elderly woman signing desperately for help, and I had a choice, keep walking or stop. He paused, finding Margaret in the crowd. I stopped, and that choice changed everything. The audience was completely silent, attentive. Margaret Wells told me later that I'd seen her, really seen her, not as a deaf person, but as a person who happened to be deaf and needed help. That's what we tried to do with this building. We didn't design for theoretical deaf users. We designed for real people with real needs, real dreams, real ways of moving through the world. We centered visual communication instead of treating it as an accommodation. We made beauty and function inseparable. He gestured to the building around them. This space works because we listened, because 57 members of the deaf and hard of hearing community shared their experiences and frustrations and hopes. Because a brilliant team of architects and engineers and designers used their expertise to translate those insights into reality. Because everyone involved believed that inclusion wasn't a feature to add, but a foundation to build from. Evan looked at Lila, sitting in the front row between Harper and Margaret, signing enthusiastically, even though she was too young to really understand everything. My daughter is 8 years old and profoundly deaf, Evan continued. She's growing up in a world that doesn't always see her, doesn't always accommodate her, doesn't always understand that being deaf isn't a deficit, but a difference. I want her to grow up knowing that spaces can be designed for her, that buildings can speak her language, that she belongs everywhere. His voice caught slightly. This building is for her and for everyone like her. It's a promise that we can do better, design better, be better. The audience erupted in applause, hands raised and waving in the deaf applause that filled the space with silent celebration. Evan saw tears on many faces, saw people signing to each other with emotion, saw the community claiming this space as their own. After the formal ceremony, Evan walked through the building with Harper and Lila, watching as people explored every corner. The auditorium, with its perfect sightlines, was already hosting a performance, ASL poetry filling the space with flowing hands and expressive faces. The community gathering areas were crowded with people signing and laughing and connecting. The children's space, incorporating Lila's design elements, was full of kids running and playing in an environment designed to work for them. It's perfect, Lila signed, looking around with wide eyes. Everyone looks happy. They look like they belong, Evan signed back. That's what we wanted, for people to feel like this space was made for them, not despite them. Harper slipped her hand into Evan's, and he squeezed back, both of them watching the community fill the space they'd created together. Margaret appeared beside them, her face wet with tears. Thank you, she signed simply, for seeing me that day, for seeing all of us. Thank you for giving me the chance to try, Evan signed back. That evening, after the dedication, after the celebrations, After Lila had finally crashed from exhaustion and been put to bed, Evan and Harper sat on his apartment's small balcony, watching Hartford's lights twinkle in the darkness. "We did something good today," Harper said quietly. "We did something necessary," Evan corrected. "There should be hundreds of buildings like this, thousands." "So we make more," Harper said simply. "The City Hall project, and then others. We build a practice around inclusive design. We train other architects. We change the standard." She turned to look at him. "This is just the beginning, Evan. What we started today, it's going to ripple outward." "I hope so," Evan said. "I hope Lila grows up in a world where buildings like Hartford Community Center are normal, not exceptional." "She will," Harper said with certainty. "Because you're helping build that world. We're helping build it together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Harper said, "I have something to ask you." Evan's heart rate picked up at her tone, serious but excited, nervous but certain. "Move in with me," Harper said. "Not right away, not until Lila's ready, not until we've figured out all the logistics. But eventually. Build a life with me, Evan. Not just a professional partnership, but a real partnership. You and Lila and me, figuring it out together." Evan felt emotion rise in his throat. "Harper, I know it's complicated," Harper continued. "I know you have to think about Lila, about Mrs. Chen, about schools and routines and everything that matters. But I love you, Evan Carter. I love your daughter. I love the family you've built, and the person you are, and the work we do together. And I want to build something permanent with you." "I love you too," Evan said, the words feeling both monumental and simple. "And yes, not right away, but yes. Let's build something together." They kissed under Hartford's sky. Two architects who'd found each other through an act of compassion, who'd built something beautiful together professionally and personally, who were choosing to keep building. The months that followed brought changes both logistical and emotional. Evan, Harper, and Lila started spending more time together as a unit, weekends exploring Boston, evenings in Hartford, holidays beginning to blend their traditions. They introduced Lila to the idea gradually, letting her adjust to Harper's increased presence, making sure she felt secure and central and never an afterthought. By spring, Lila was asking when Harper was moving in, not if, and they started looking at houses together, something with space for all of them, close enough to Lila's school in Hartford but commutable to Boston. Something that could become home for this pieced-together family they were creating, Mrs. Chen was delighted by the developments, telling Evan she'd known from the start that he needed a partner, someone who understood both his work and his heart. "You were so lonely," Mrs. Chen said one afternoon, helping Evan pack up his apartment in preparation for the move. "Even before Sarah left, you were lonely. But now you light up when Harper walks into a room. That's how it should be." The Hartford Community Center became a model for other projects, exactly as Harper had predicted. Other cities reached out, other communities asked for similar thoughtfulness, and Wells and Avery's accessible design practice grew rapidly. Evan hired 2 junior architects specifically to focus on inclusive design, training them in the principles he'd learned through lived experience and community input. One of his new hires was a recent graduate who was hard of hearing herself, and watching her bring her own insights to projects reminded Evan why this work mattered. The next generation of architects would include more diverse voices, more lived experience, more people who understood accessibility not as a checklist but as a fundamental design principle. Lila turned 10 in March, and for her birthday party she asked to visit the Hartford Community Center and show her friends around the building her dad designed. Evan watched as she led a group of 10-year-olds through the space, explaining sightlines and lighting design with the confidence of someone who'd grown up understanding that buildings could include or exclude, could welcome or alienate. "My dad made this building for people like me," Lila told her friends proudly. "For deaf people and hard of hearing people, so we have a place that works the way we work." Maya, Lila's best friend, signed something that made Lila giggle, and they ran off together to explore the Children's Activity Center. Harper slipped her hand into Evan's. "She's going to change the world," Harper said quietly. "She already is," Evan replied. In May, exactly 3 years after that Tuesday afternoon in the airport, Evan and Harper got married in a small ceremony at the Hartford Community Center, surrounded by the community they'd served and the colleagues who'd helped make their vision real. Margaret stood beside Harper, signing the ceremony for guests, her face radiant with joy. Lila was the flower girl, taking her role seriously and scattering petals with the focus of an architect executing a detailed plan. The ceremony was conducted in both ASL and speech, every word signed and spoken simultaneously, and when the officiant pronounced them married, the room erupted in deaf applause, hundreds of hands waving in celebration. At the reception, Margaret pulled Evan aside for a moment, her eyes suspiciously bright. 3 years ago, she signed, I was invisible in an airport, and you stopped. You saw me, you helped me, and look what came from that single choice. She gestured around the room, the community center they'd designed, the colleagues celebrating, Lila dancing with Harper on the makeshift dance floor. One moment of compassion created all of this. That's the power we have, Evan. Every time we choose to see someone, every time we stop to help, we change the world a little bit. You changed my world completely, Evan signed back. I was drowning before I met you, struggling to keep my head above water, convinced I'd never achieve anything meaningful. And you gave me a chance to do work that matters, to be part of something bigger than myself. No, Margaret signed firmly. You gave yourself that chance. You made the choice to stop, to help, to see. I just recognized what you already were, a person with a good heart and the courage to act on it. Everything else you earned. The party stretched late into the evening, celebration and joy filling the building that had started as sketches and community input and had become something real and solid and permanent. Evan danced with Lila, with Harper, with Margaret. He talked with community members who shared stories about how the building had changed their lives, about programs offered here, about connections made in these thoughtfully designed spaces. Late in the evening, as things were winding down, William Torres pulled Evan aside. I have something to show you, William signed, leading Evan to the building's entrance. Above the main doors, workers had just finished installing a plaque. It read, Hartford Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Designed by Wells and Avery. Design Group. Lead Accessibility Consultant, Evan Carter. A building designed not just for us, but with us, where visual communication is celebrated, where difference is centered, where everyone belongs. Dedicated October 2026. Evan stood staring at the plaque, his name permanently attached to this work. This statement, this promise that spaces could be designed with intention and care for communities that had been marginalized for too long. Your work here will echo for generations, William signed. Children who grow up coming to this center will understand that buildings can work for them, that design can be inclusive, that they deserve spaces made with them in mind. You gave us that gift, Evan, you and your team. Evan thought about Lila, about Margaret, about every person who'd shared their stories in focus groups, about the 57 community members who'd trusted him with their experiences and dreams. He thought about Harper, who'd taken a chance on a struggling architect whose only credential was compassion. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon in an airport when he'd chosen to stop instead of walking past. Thank you, Evan signed to William, for letting me be part of this, for trusting me with something so important to your community. Thank you for being worth the trust, William signed back. Evan returned to the reception to find Harper and Lila waiting for him, both of them signing, "There you are," simultaneously, and then laughing at the coincidence. His wife and his daughter, the two people who meant everything, waiting to celebrate with him the work they'd all contributed to in different ways. Ready to go home? Harper signed, and the word home felt full of meaning, not just a physical place, but a state of being, a sense of belonging, a life they were building together. Yeah, Evan signed back, pulling both of them close. Let's go home. They left the Hartford Community Center that night under a sky full of stars, the building behind them lit and welcoming, a testament to what happened when people chose to see each other, when compassion guided design, when communities were centered in the spaces meant to serve them. Evan Carter had stopped in an airport terminal 3 years ago to help an elderly woman who needed assistance, and that single choice had reshaped his entire existence. He'd found meaningful work, financial stability, love, family, purpose. He'd learned that architecture was about more than buildings. It was about dignity, about inclusion, about creating spaces where every person could exist fully and without apology. But more than any of that, he'd learned that the smallest acts of compassion created ripples that extended far beyond what we could see in the moment. That stopping to help someone wasn't just the right thing to do morally, it was an investment in a future we couldn't yet imagine, a seed planted that would grow in unexpected directions. Sometimes love began not with words but with hands moving through air, with someone choosing to see instead of looking away, with the simple, profound act of acknowledging another person's humanity. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe rewarded good hearts with more than they'd ever dared to dream, with work that mattered, with love that endured, with buildings that would stand for generations as monuments to what happened when people chose kindness over convenience, when they stopped running long enough to see who needed help, when they designed with intention and care for communities that deserved so much better than they'd been given. Evan Carter had stopped in an airport, and in stopping, he'd found everything he'd been searching for without knowing he was searching: purpose, partnership, and the extraordinary power of simply choosing to see. The end.